I'll never forget the sound of my family laughing when my father handed me a $10 bill at my grandfather's will reading. My sister Olivia had just inherited $10 million. The room was still buzzing with congratulations when the attorney called my name. I held my breath. Maybe finally, after 35 years of being invisible in my own family, I'd get some recognition. My father stood up, pulled a crumpled $10 bill from his wallet, and slid it across the table toward me. $10 is more than enough to start a business, he announced to the crowded room. Go earn your own success, Ashley. People with real worth don't need handouts. The humiliation was suffocating. My aunts whispered. My cousins looked away. My mother said nothing. My father's satisfied smirk told me everything. This was his final verdict on my worthlessness. I was about to walk out, ready to disappear from this family forever, when an elderly man stood up from the back of the room. That is not the complete will. My father's face went white. What happened next exposed 30 years of lies, theft, and betrayal that my father had buried. The secret my grandfather's lawyer revealed didn't just change my life, it destroyed my father's. By the time this story ends, you'll see how a $10 bill became the weapon that brought down a narcissistic patriarch, freed 3 generations of women, and proved that the daughter he threw away was worth more than he could ever comprehend. This is the story of how I went from family scapegoat to the one holding all the cards, and why my father is now the one begging for mercy he'll never receive. My name is Ashley Reed. I'm 35 years old, and I run a financial consulting firm in Seattle that specializes in retirement planning for clients over 55. On paper, my life looks exactly like what I built it to be: successful, independent, and entirely mine. The truth is more complicated. My office sits on the 3rd floor of a renovated brick building in Capitol Hill with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook Pike Street. It's modest, but professional IKEA furniture. I assembled my self-framed credentials on the wall, a single-potted succulent on my desk that somehow refuses to die despite my neglect. I don't believe in flashy displays of wealth. My clients don't need to see expensive art or designer furniture. They need to see competent stability and someone who genuinely cares about protecting what they've spent a lifetime building. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I arrived at 7:30, made coffee in the small kitchenette, and reviewed my schedule. 3 client meetings, 2 follow-up calls, and a mountain of paperwork for a new portfolio I was designing. The routine felt safe, predictable. Nothing in my carefully constructed world suggested that within 12 hours everything would change. My 10 o'clock appointment was with Margaret and Tom Hutchinson, a couple in their late 60s planning their estate. They'd been married 42 years, had 3 adult children, and wanted to make sure everything was fair and square, as Tom put it. I'd been working with them for 6 months, helping them structure their investments and plan distributions that would provide for their kids without creating resentment or dependency. Margaret sat across from my desk, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed the documents I'd prepared. So each child receives an equal third, she confirmed, running her finger down the page. We've thought about this for years, Ashley. We never wanted any of them to feel less valued than the others. Something in her voice made my pen pause mid-signature. Less valued. Such simple words, but they landed like a punch to my sternum. That's important to you, I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral even as my throat tightened. Oh, absolutely, Tom chimed in, reaching for his wife's hand. We've seen too many families torn apart over inheritance. Parents playing favorites, one kid getting everything while the others get scraps. It's cruel, really. Children can sense when they're not valued the same. It damages them. Margaret nodded emphatically. Our eldest David, he's always been the high achiever. But that doesn't make him more deserving than his sisters. They all matter equally. They're all our children. I felt my professional mask slip for just a fraction of a second, a micro-expression of something raw and old that I normally kept buried. I recovered quickly, redirecting my attention to the documents, but Margaret's eyes had caught it. She tilted her head slightly, studying me with the kind of gentle perception that comes from decades of reading people. I cleared my throat. You're creating a legacy of fairness. That's invaluable. We finished the meeting without incident, but Margaret's words followed me through the rest of the day like a ghost. They all matter equally. They're all our children. Such a simple concept, such a foreign reality. By the time I locked my office at 6:15 and drove home to my Belltown apartment, exhaustion had settled into my bones. Not the good kind that comes from a productive day, but the heavy emotional kind that comes from holding yourself together when old wounds start bleeding through the present. My apartment reflected the same aesthetic as my office: clean, minimalist, functional. A gray sectional couch, a glass coffee table with nothing on it. A kitchen I rarely used beyond coffee and microwaved meals. The walls were white, decorated with abstract art I'd bought at IKEA, the kind of art that fills space without meaning anything. What my apartment didn't have were family photos. No pictures of holidays, birthdays, graduations. No frames on the mantel showing a smiling family gathered around a Christmas tree, or vacation snapshots from beach trips. Visitors might assume I was private or minimalist. The truth was simpler and more painful. I had no family moments worth displaying. In my bedroom closet, shoved behind winter coats I rarely needed in Seattle's mild climate, sat a cardboard box. I hadn't opened it in 6 years, but I knew exactly what it contained. A handful of birthday cards from my grandfather, school photos from elementary through high school, a pressed flower from my high school graduation corsage, a ribbon from a debate competition I'd won in 10th grade. Pieces of a past I couldn't quite let go of, but couldn't bear to look at. I was heating up leftover Thai food when my phone rang at 8:47. Unknown number, Idaho area code. I almost didn't answer, probably a telemarketer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Ashley Reed?" A man's voice, formal and careful. "Yes, this is she." "Yes, this is Ms. Reed. My name is Harold Harris. I'm an attorney in Cascade, Idaho. I'm calling regarding your grandfather, James Reed." My heart dropped. I set down my fork, the container of pad thai suddenly forgotten. "I'm very sorry to inform you that Mr. Reed passed away yesterday evening. The funeral is scheduled for Friday, and the will reading will take place immediately afterward, Saturday morning at 10. Your presence is requested." The words came at me like they were underwater, muffled, distant, wrong. Grandpa James was gone. The one person in my family who'd ever made me feel like I mattered, and I hadn't been there. Hadn't known he was sick. Hadn't said goodbye. "Ms. Reed, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed, though my voice sounded strange even to myself. "I'll be there, Saturday morning." After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen phone, still clutched in my hand, feeling the foundations of my carefully ordered life beginning to crack. I hadn't been home in 6 years, hadn't spoken to my father Richard in even longer. The thought of facing him, of walking back into that house, made my chest constrict with something between dread and old familiar pain. I was still standing there frozen when my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years, Dad. My hand trembled as I stared at it, watching it ring once, twice, 3 times. The man who'd spent my entire life making me feel invisible, worthless, was calling me now, after 6 years of silence. On the same night I learned his father had died. I knew exactly why he was calling, and I knew that answering it would mean stepping back into a past I'd spent years trying to escape. The phone continued to ring, his name glowing on the screen like a dare. I answered on the 4th ring, my thumb moving before my brain could override the decision. "Hello? Your grandfather wanted you at the reading." My father's voice came through the line exactly as I remembered it, cold-clipped, transactional. No greeting. No acknowledgement that we hadn't spoken in years. "I assume you can manage to show up for once." The words hit like a slap, but I'd had 6 years to build my armor. "I already spoke with the attorney. I'll be there Saturday." "How gracious of you to make time in your busy schedule." The sarcasm dripped through the phone. Running your little consulting business must be so demanding. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the grief raw and fresh. Maybe it was exhaustion from pretending his words didn't matter. My business manages $8 million in client assets, Dad. I have 47 clients who trust me with their retirement security. It's not a hobby. He laughed. Actually laughed. Ashley, people with real worth don't need to prove it. They contribute to family legacy, to something bigger than themselves. You've spent years playing office in Seattle while Olivia actually stayed here and helped. She visited your grandfather every week. She was here when he needed family. The familiar script. I'd heard variations of it my entire life, but it still found its mark. Olivia visited him to ask for money, I said quietly. I know because Grandpa told me. And there it is. His voice turned sharp. Always trying to tear your sister down because you can't stand that she's loved, that she matters to this family in ways you never did. Saturday, 10 a.m. Try not to embarrass us with whatever bohemian outfit you're wearing these days. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen phone pressed to my ear, even though he was gone, and felt something crumble inside me that I'd thought I'd rebuilt years ago. It wasn't just his words I'd heard worse from him. It was the realization that despite everything I'd accomplished, despite the business I'd built from nothing, despite the life I'd created on my own terms, his voice still had the power to make me feel 8 years old again. Small, worthless, wrong. I set the phone down carefully, afraid that if I moved too quickly, something fragile inside me would shatter completely. Your value is measured by what you do for us, not who you become. That had always been his philosophy. Success meant nothing unless it served the family name, contributed to his legacy, reflected well on him. My MIT acceptance had been dismissed as me trying too hard to compensate for natural limitations. My graduation summa cum laude went unmentioned while Olivia's barely passing grades at state school were celebrated because she's well-rounded, not just book-smart. When I'd landed my first financial analyst position at a major firm in Seattle, he'd asked why I was wasting my degree on glorified bookkeeping. Nothing I achieved was ever enough because it wasn't about him. I walked to my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands shaking. The box in my closet seemed to pulse with accusation. Inside it were report cards covered in A's that had earned me nothing but a distracted, "That's nice, honey," while Olivia's B's got dinner celebrations. My college acceptance letter to MIT with my father's only comment, "Well, we'll see if you can handle it." The newspaper clipping about my business launch that I'd mailed home 3 years ago returned to sender without a note. The little girl who'd tried so desperately to be good enough, smart enough, successful enough to earn her father's love, she was still there, still hoping, still bleeding from wounds I'd convinced myself had healed. I didn't sleep that night. I went through the motions of getting ready for bed, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my father's words playing on an endless loop. By the time my alarm went off at 6, I felt hollowed out, scraped raw. I went to the office anyway. Work had always been my refuge, the one place where my worth was quantifiable and recognized. But when Margaret Hutchinson called at 9 to ask if she could stop by with just a quick question, I knew my carefully maintained facade had cracks showing. She appeared 20 minutes later with 2 lattes and the kind of concerned expression that made my throat tight. Margaret had become more than a client over the past 6 months. At 62, she had a way of seeing through people's professional masks. "You look like hell, sweetheart," she said, setting a latte in front of me and settling into the chair across my desk. "Want to talk about it? Or shall we pretend everything's fine?" I almost deflected. Almost gave her the polished response about being tired, about work stress, about anything but the truth. But something about her kind, knowing eyes broke through my defenses. "My grandfather died," I said. "I have to go home for the funeral. I haven't been back in 6 years. And you're dreading it." It wasn't a question, so I didn't bother lying. "My father called last night. 5 minutes of conversation and I felt like I was 12 years old again, failing at being the daughter he wanted." Margaret sipped her latte, studying me with that sharp perception that had probably served her well through 42 years of marriage and raising 3 kids. Can I tell you something? I spent 30 years trying to earn respect from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth it. My first husband's family thought I wasn't good enough, wrong background, wrong education, wrong everything. I bent myself into knots trying to prove them wrong, did everything they asked, changed who I was, gave up dreams, sacrificed pieces of myself. She set down her cup. Worst 3 decades of my life. You know what changed? I got divorced, married Tom, and stopped trying to earn respect from people who'd never give it. I started demanding it instead, drew boundaries, walked away from people who diminished me. That's when everything changed. I felt tears prick my eyes but refused to let them fall. How do you just stop caring what they think? You don't stop caring, Margaret said gently. You stop letting their opinion define your reality. There's a difference. She leaned forward. Sometimes going back isn't about them, Ashley. It's about you finally closing a door they've kept propped open. You can't move forward while you're still hoping they'll finally see you. After she left, I sat alone in my office, her words echoing in the silence. I'd built this life, this business, this version of myself that was competent and successful and completely independent. But I'd built it in the shadow of my father's rejection, still unconsciously trying to prove him wrong, still hoping that one day he'd see what I'd accomplished, and admit he'd been mistaken about me. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe going back wasn't about them finally recognizing my worth. Maybe this was the last time they'd get to decide it. I left Seattle Thursday morning at 5 a.m., my Toyota Camry packed with a black dress for the funeral toiletries and a knot of dread in my stomach that seemed to grow heavier with every mile. I could have flown. There's a small regional airport 40 minutes from Cascade, but I needed the drive. I needed time to prepare myself to rebuild the armor my father had cracked with a single phone call. The journey from Seattle to Cascade, Idaho takes 7 hours if you don't stop longer if you do. I planned to make it in one push, fueled by gas station coffee and the stubborn determination that had gotten me through every hard thing in my life. The landscape transformed as I drove, a physical manifestation of the emotional distance I'd traveled. Seattle's progressive, rain-soaked streets gave way to the agricultural sprawl of eastern Washington, then the high desert of Oregon, and finally the mountains and valleys of Idaho. The political bumper stickers changed. The radio stations shifted from NPR to country and Christian talk radio. Even the air felt different when I finally crossed into Idaho, thinner, colder, laden with memories I'd spent 6 years trying to forget. I'd told myself I was over it, that I'd healed, that Cascade and everyone in it no longer had power over me. But as I took the exit for Highway 55 and wound through the familiar curves toward town, my hands tightened on the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Cascade hadn't changed. Population 943 nestled in the mountains near Cascade Reservoir, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and strangers are noticed immediately. I drove down Main Street past the high school where I'd spent 4 years being invisible despite a 4.0 GPA. Past the public library where I'd hidden during lunch periods reading in the back corner because sitting alone in the cafeteria hurt too much. Past the Copper Creek Diner where my family held celebrations that were really just showcases for Olivia's mediocre achievements, making the JV cheerleading squad, getting asked to homecoming, passing her driver's test on the 3rd try. The town's welcome sign appeared as I rounded the final curve, Cascade, Idaho, where family comes first. Someone had added fresh flowers to the base, probably the garden club. The phrase that was supposed to be heartwarming made my stomach clench. Family comes first. In this town, that wasn't just a motto, it was a weapon used to keep people in line, to shame anyone who dared to want something different, to suggest that leaving meant betrayal. I pulled over at the overlook just past the sign, needing a moment before I drove the final 2 miles to my childhood home. The reservoir spread out below, crystalline and beautiful, surrounded by pine forests and mountains. Objectively, it was stunning. Subjectively, it was a cage I'd barely escaped. A memory hit me without warning, so vivid I could smell the lemons and taste the summer heat. I was 8 years old, sitting on the curb in front of our house with a card table, a pitcher of lemonade, and a hand-painted sign that read, Ashley's Lemonade, 50 cents. I'd spent the morning squeezing lemons, mixing sugar water, and calculating in my little notebook how many cups I'd need to sell to make $10. $10 felt like a fortune. I was going to buy a book I wanted and save the rest. Grandpa James had been my first customer. He'd pulled up in his truck, climbed out with that slow, careful way he moved even then, and studied my setup with the seriousness of a man evaluating a business proposal. "How much?" he'd asked. I'd told him 50 cents. He'd handed me a $5 bill. "Keep the change," he'd said, winking. "Smart businesswoman. You'll go far, Ashley girl." I'd been beaming, pouring his lemonade into one of the plastic cups I'd borrowed from the kitchen when the front door slammed open. My father had stormed out, his face red with a rage I didn't understand. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm selling lemonade, Daddy. I already made $5, though. You're embarrassing this family." His voice had been loud enough that neighbors looked out their windows. "Reeds don't beg for money on the street like common beggars." "We're not poor, Ashley. We don't need you panhandling in front of our house." "But I'm not begging, I'm selling." He'd kicked the table. I still remembered the sound of it, tipping the pitcher, shattering on the concrete lemonade and glass spreading across the sidewalk. I'd started crying. Grandpa James had stepped forward, saying something I couldn't hear over my own sobs, but my father had grabbed my arm and dragged me inside while I apologized. Through tears, I didn't understand I'd done something wrong. What I hadn't known until years later, when I'd found it in an old jacket pocket while packing for college, was that Grandpa James had slipped something into my jacket that day. A $10 bill folded around a note written in his careful handwriting. "This isn't charity. This is your first investor. Build something worthy." I'd kept that note. It was in the box in my closet in Seattle, one of the few things I couldn't throw away. Sitting in my car 27 years later, I touched my jacket pocket reflexively, as if the note might still be there. That's when I'd learned my value could be measured in $10. That's when I'd learned entrepreneurship was shameful ambition, was embarrassing, and trying to build something of your own meant you were somehow betraying the family. I started the car and drove the final 2 miles. The Reed house loomed at the end of Pinecrest Drive, a large colonial that projected success and old money despite the fact that my father had inherited everything from Grandpa James. White pillars, black shutters, landscaping maintained by professionals. It looked like a magazine spread. It had always felt like a museum, beautiful but cold. A place where you weren't supposed to touch anything or make noise or take up too much space. In the circular driveway sat a luxury Range Rover with vanity plates that made my jaw clench. Daddy's GRL. Olivia's car, or more accurately, the car my father leased for Olivia. I parked my 7-year-old Toyota Camry next to it, and the visual contrast said everything about the past 35 years. Curtains twitched in the neighbor's window. Mrs. Patterson from across the street stood on her porch pretending to water plants while openly staring. I could read her expression from 50 feet away, pity mixed with curiosity. Poor Ashley, the one who left. The one who couldn't hack it here. Still single, I heard. 35 and alone. I turned off the engine and sat gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house that had never felt like home. 6 years. I'd built an entire life in 6 years. A business. A reputation. A sense of self that didn't depend on anyone's approval. But here in this driveway, looking at that vanity plate, I felt like the girl who wasn't good enough all over again. I forced myself to get out of the car. Forced my legs to carry me up the front walk. Forced my hand to ring the doorbell, even though this had once been my house, and ringing the bell felt like admitting I was a stranger. The door opened. My mother stood there, 54 but looking older. Her face carefully made up, her clothes expensive, but somehow joyless. She looked at me for a long moment, and I waited for the hug, the "I'm glad you're here," the acknowledgement that I'd driven 7 hours to be here for my grandfather's funeral. She didn't smile. "You made it," my mother said finally, her voice flat. Not, "I'm glad you're here," or I missed you." Just an acknowledgement of my physical presence the way you'd note a package delivery. She stepped back to let me in, and I crossed the threshold into a house that smelled exactly as I remembered furniture polish, my mother's perfume, and something indefinably sterile. Linda Reed looked older than 64, though she'd clearly spent money trying to prevent it. Her face had that tight, over-maintained quality of someone who'd had work done by a competent but uninspired plastic surgeon. She hugged me briefly, her body stiff, and whispered close to my ear, "Please don't start anything. Your father's been under so much stress with Grandpa's passing." Not, "How was your drive?" or, "I'm sorry for your loss." Her first words to me in 6 years were a warning to manage my behavior so I wouldn't upset him. "Ashley." My father's voice came from the living room, and I felt my spine stiffen involuntarily. Richard Reed appeared in the doorway, 67 years old and still commanding space like he owned not just the house but the air inside it. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of distinguished appearance that made strangers trust him immediately. I'd watched him charm bank managers, church elders, and business associates my entire childhood. His power didn't come from warmth, it came from making everyone around him slightly afraid of disappointing him. He looked at me with an expression I knew well, mild distaste mixed with obligation. Finally decided to show up to something important. No hug, no acknowledgement that I'd driven 7 hours, no recognition that his father, my grandfather, had died and I was grieving too. "Hello, Dad?" "Well, don't just stand there. Come in. Olivia's been waiting to see you." He turned and walked back into the living room, expecting me to follow. I'd been in the house less than 2 minutes and already felt 8 years old again, scrambling to meet expectations I couldn't see. My sister rose from the couch as I entered, and for a moment I saw her objectively. Olivia at 31 was genuinely beautiful in that effortless way that had always come naturally to her. Blonde hair, professionally highlighted, perfect makeup, wearing expensive athleisure that probably cost more than my entire suitcase. She looked like an Instagram filter come to life. "Ash?" She crossed the room and hugged me, and unlike our mother's stiff embrace, this one felt real. "God, I missed you. 6 years is too long." For just a second I softened. But then she pulled back, and I saw what I'd always seen in Olivia's eyes, a kind of anxious need to please, to smooth over, to make everything nice. She was warm to me because that's what the moment called for, but I knew from experience that warmth would evaporate the moment Dad's mood shifted. "You look good," I told her because it was true. "Oh, you're sweet. I'm a mess. I just got back from Pilates." She gestured to the couch. Sit. Tell me everything. How's Seattle?" We settled into the familiar choreography of family conversation, that surface-level exchange that looks like connection but carefully avoids depth. Olivia talked about her gallery job, which I knew from social media consisted mostly of showing up for opening receptions and taking photos. She mentioned the condo in Boise, that Dad had helped her buy the ski trip to Sun Valley he'd funded last winter, the new Range Rover he'd leased for her, because the old one was 3 years old and starting to feel dated. Every sentence was punctuated with "Dad said," or "Dad helped," or "Dad thought." She was 31 years old and still narrated her life through our father's involvement in it. When she paused for breath, I said, "Business has been good. I'm managing about $8 million in client assets now." Olivia's perfectly shaped eyebrows drew together in confusion. "Wait, you own the business? I thought you just worked there." The question shouldn't have stung, but it did. She genuinely couldn't conceive of me as successful, as capable of building something of my own. Why would she? No one in this house had ever told her a story where I was the competent one. "I started it 3 years ago," I said, keeping my voice even. "Built it from the ground up." "Oh." She smiled brightly, the way you smile at a child who's shown you a crayon drawing. "That's great, Ash." My mother called us to dinner, then saving me from having to continue. The dining room table was set formally, the good china cloth, napkins, candles, as if this were a celebration rather than a pre-funeral gathering. We took our assigned seats, the same seats we'd occupied my entire childhood. Dad, at the head mom to his right, Olivia to his left, me at the far end where I could be easily ignored. Dinner was a performance I'd seen 1,000 times. Dad held court telling stories that painted him as the hero, the provider, the man who'd built something from nothing. Never mind that he'd inherited a thriving business from Grandpa James. In Richard Reed's version of history, everything good came from his own brilliance. "Remember when the company was struggling back in '05, he said, cutting into his steak. "Everyone said I should cut my losses, but I stuck it out, made the hard decisions. That's what real leadership looks like." I remembered 2005 differently. I remembered Grandpa James quietly bailing out the company with his own money while Dad blamed the employees for not working hard enough. The conversation revolved entirely around Olivia, her gallery, her social life, the charity auction she'd organized, which really meant she'd put her name on an event other people planned. When she described choosing flower arrangements for the auction, Mom oohed appreciatively and Dad beamed with pride. "That's my girl," he said, "always thinking about the community." I waited for a break in the conversation, then mentioned, "I was featured in Seattle Business Magazine last month. They did a profile on women entrepreneurs in finance." Dad didn't even look up from his plate. "That's nice, honey." He turned to Olivia. "Speaking of community, tell Ashley about that charity auction. The one where you raised $15,000. Olivia launched into the story, and I sat there counting. In 90 minutes of dinner, I'd been asked exactly 2 questions about my life. How was the drive? And are you still renting? Both were asked by my mother. Both were perfunctory, requiring only yes or no answers. No one asked about my business, my life in Seattle, whether I was happy, whether I'd been hurting these past 6 years of estrangement. I was physically present, but emotionally erased, exactly as I'd been my entire childhood. As dessert was being served, I tried once more. "The firm's actually doing really well. We managed to help a couple restructure their estate last month in a way that'll save their kids about $200,000 in taxes." Richard finally looked at me, and I saw the familiar expression, condescension wrapped in a smile. "Managing other people's money doesn't make it yours, sweetheart." The words landed like they always did, a precision strike designed to diminish without appearing overtly cruel. Around the table, no one reacted. This was normal. This was how Richard Reed reminded me of my place. I excused myself early, claiming exhaustion from the drive, and retreated to my childhood bedroom, which had been converted into a guest room years ago. All traces of me had been erased, the debate team trophies, the bookshelf crammed with novels, the desk where I'd studied until 2 a.m. most nights. Now it held generic hotel furniture and beige walls. Even my history had been painted over. The next morning, Friday, was the funeral. I won't describe it in detail because funerals are performances, and this one was no different. My father played the grieving son beautifully. I stood in the backs of the church and cried for a man who'd been the only person in my family who ever made me feel seen. That evening, relatives descended on the house for what my mother called a small gathering, but was really an audience for the next day's main event. The will reading was scheduled for 10 a.m. Saturday, and everyone wanted to be positioned perfectly for whatever fallout might occur. By 7 p.m., the living room was crowded with aunts, uncles, cousins I barely remembered, and family friends who'd known Grandpa James for decades. The assumption in the room was so unanimous it might as well have been printed on the napkins James Reed had left everything to Olivia. "Well, it only makes sense," Aunt Martha announced to a circle of listeners, her voice carrying across the room with the confidence of someone who'd never been contradicted. Martha was my father's older sister, 69, with the same commanding presence and absolute certainty in her own correctness. Olivia was always here helping him, visiting every week. That girl is devoted. My jaw tightened. I was standing near enough to hear but far enough away to be invisible, which seemed to be my default position in this family. Olivia visited Grandpa maybe once a month, and usually those visits involved asking him for money, a car repair credit card debt, a temporary loan that was never repaid. I knew because Grandpa had mentioned it in his letters to me, always gently, never criticizing, but the subtext was clear. Uncle Tom, Martha's husband, nodded sagely. Ashley was too busy in Seattle to care. Couldn't be bothered to come home. I felt heat rise in my chest, but said nothing. What would be the point? These people had decided on a narrative that made them comfortable. The truth that I'd been quietly supporting Grandpa financially for 3 years, that I'd sent him cards and articles and letters every month, that I'd called him weekly until last year, when the calls mysteriously stopped going through, wouldn't fit their story. It's sad, really. Someone else chimed in, a cousin whose name I'd forgotten. When you abandon family, you can't expect to be remembered in the will. I stayed silent, watching these people who barely knew me explain who I was and what I'd done, and felt that familiar powerlessness of being defined by others. In their version, I was the ungrateful granddaughter who'd chosen ambition over family. In my version, I was the one who'd escaped before this family could finish erasing me. I slipped out to the back porch needing air and found Mrs. Patterson from across the street standing in the garden. Eleanor Patterson was 82, had lived on Pinecrest Drive for 40 years, and had been one of the few neighbors who'd been genuinely kind to me as a child. Ashley, dear. She turned when she heard the door, her weathered face creasing into a smile. I wanted to talk to you, but not in there. She glanced toward the house with an expression I couldn't quite read. Walk with me. We moved toward the back fence out of earshot from the house. Mrs. Patterson took my arm gently as if she needed the support, though I suspected it was more about ensuring I'd listen. Your grandfather talked about you constantly, she said without preamble. Every time I saw him at the store at church in his front yard, he'd tell me about you. He was so proud of your business. He showed me articles you sent him about financial planning, bragged about how you were helping people protect their retirement. He kept them all in a folder, you know. I felt my throat constrict. He never told me that. He tried calling you many times last year, Mrs. Patterson said, and something in her voice made me focus completely. He mentioned it to me several times. He'd say, I tried to reach Ashley again today, but apparently she's too busy. But he didn't say it like he believed it. He said it like he was repeating what someone told him. My blood went cold. I never got calls from him. My number hasn't changed. I didn't think so. Mrs. Patterson's grip on my arm tightened. Your father was very involved in James's care those final months. Very involved. He handled the phone, the mail, the visitors. He said it was to protect your grandfather from unnecessary stress. The implications settled over me like ice water. I'd wondered why Grandpa stopped calling. I'd assumed he was angry with me or that our relationship had become one-sided, my letters going into a void. It had never occurred to me that my father might have been intercepting contact. Did Grandpa seem confused toward the end? I asked. Any dementia or memory issues? Mrs. Patterson shook her head firmly. Sharp as ever. He was managing his own finances until the week he died. I know because he helped my son sort out an investment question 2 weeks before he passed. His mind was perfectly clear. She paused, looking back at the house where light spilled from every window and voices carried on the night air. I probably shouldn't say this, but something didn't sit right with me these past few months. Your father was always at James's house, always managing things, always speaking for him. And James got quieter, more withdrawn, like he'd given up on something. After Mrs. Patterson went home, I couldn't bring myself to go back inside. I sat in one of the porch chairs, my mind racing. Grandpa James had been completely competent. He'd tried to call me and been told I was too busy. My father had controlled access to him. And now, according to everyone inside the will, left everything to Olivia. But none of it made sense. For 3 years, I'd been sending Grandpa $500 a month through automatic transfers from a business account I'd set up under the name Cascade Financial Services, specifically so my father wouldn't trace it back to me. Every month, Grandpa sent a handwritten thank you note to my Seattle office. Your support means more than you know. I'm proud of who you've become, Ashley girl. Don't let anyone tell you different. He knew. He knew I was the one who cared, who supported him, who stayed connected despite the distance. Why would he leave everything to Olivia, who only showed up when she needed money, unless he hadn't? The thought crystallized in the darkness. What if Grandpa tried to protect me to finally do right by me and they buried it with him? Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that feels cruel during grief. I dressed carefully in my black suit, applied minimal makeup, and prepared myself for what I assumed would be a formality. Whatever Grandpa had left me, if anything, wouldn't change the fundamental truth of my family. But I owed it to him to be there. Attorney Morrison's office occupied the second floor of a brick building on Main Street above the hardware store that had been there since the 1950s. By 9:45, the conference room was packed. My father sat at the head of the table naturally with my mother beside him. Olivia took the chair to his left. I found a seat near the door as far from the center of attention as possible. Aunt Martha and Uncle Tom claimed prominent positions. Cousins I barely knew lined the walls. Even Mrs. Patterson had been invited, sitting quietly in the corner. Walter Morrison was 73, had been the Reed family attorney for 40 years, and had the formal bearing of someone who'd spent his entire career witnessing family drama while maintaining professional neutrality. He arranged papers on the table with methodical precision, adjusted his reading glasses, and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. We're here for the reading of James Edward Reed's last will and testament executed on March 15th of this year." His voice carried the practiced solemnity of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. "I'll begin with the standard provisions." He read through bequests to the housekeeper, the groundskeeper, various charities Grandpa had supported. 5,000 to the church, 10,000 to the local library. Everything exactly as expected. The room listened with respectful attention, waiting for the main event. "Now to the primary inheritances." Morrison adjusted his glasses. "To my beloved granddaughter Olivia Reed, I leave the sum of $10 million to be held in trust and managed responsibly for her long-term financial security and well-being." The room erupted. Aunt Martha gasped. Uncle Tom started clapping. Cousins murmured congratulations. Olivia's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling down her perfect cheeks. My father reached over and squeezed her shoulder, his face radiating satisfaction, not happiness for her, but vindication for himself. This was proof of what he'd always known: Olivia was the one who mattered. I sat perfectly still, my face a careful mask. I'd expected this. I'd prepared for this. But sitting in a room full of people celebrating my sister's inheritance while I waited to hear if I'd even be mentioned felt like being 8 years old again, watching my lemonade stand get destroyed while neighbors watched from their windows. Morrison waited for the noise to settle, then cleared his throat again. "To my granddaughter, Ashley Reed." The room went instantly silent. Every eye turned toward me. I felt the weight of their attention, their curiosity about what embarrassingly small amount I'd receive. $1,000. 5,000. Just enough to be technically acknowledged, but clearly less valued. I held my breath despite myself, despite knowing better than to hope. "I leave the sum of $10 with this note." Morrison's voice remained professionally neutral as he read, $10 is more than enough to start a business. Go earn your own success." For a moment, the words didn't process. Then Morrison slid an envelope across the table toward me, and I saw it a single $10 bill, crisp and new, placed inside like it was something precious. The room's reaction was visceral and immediate. Someone gasped. Cousin Jake whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Ouch, that's cold." Aunt Martha made a shocked sound. Several relatives looked away embarrassed to witness my humiliation. A few exchanged glances that mixed pity with something worse, confirmation that I'd deserved this, somehow. $10. My grandfather, who I'd supported for 3 years, who I'd stayed connected with despite everything, had left me $10 and a note that essentially said I wasn't worth investing in. The message was clear: earn your own success because you're not worthy of mine. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The envelope sat in front of me like an accusation. My father stood, and I recognized the expression on his face. satisfaction so profound it was almost joy. This was his ultimate vindication delivered from beyond the grave by his own father. Even Grandpa James, who I'd believed loved me, had agreed Ashley wasn't worth it. "Well," Richard said, his voice carrying that false sympathy he'd perfected over decades. "Ashley has always preferred to be independent. Clearly, Dad respected that choice." He looked around the room, ensuring everyone understood the subtext she brought this on herself. Some people need to be handed things. Others prefer to earn their way. Dad obviously knew which one Ashley was. The implication was brutal. Olivia deserved millions because she was valuable. I deserved $10 because even charity would be wasted on me. Olivia looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting between me and our father, but she said nothing. Her silence felt like complicity. She could have spoken up, could have said this was wrong, could have defended me. Instead, she sat there accepting her millions while I held an envelope containing my worth. My mother leaned close and whispered, her voice somehow making it worse. "He probably thought you didn't need it, honey, with your little business." My little business. $10. Go earn your own success. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I couldn't stay here. Couldn't sit in this room full of people who'd just witnessed the final public declaration that I didn't matter and never had. My hands shook as I reached for my purse. I'd drive back to Seattle today right now and never return. I'd been stupid to hope, stupid to think that maybe Grandpa had seen me differently than everyone else. I was halfway to the door when a voice spoke from the back corner of the room. "That is not the complete will." Everyone turned toward the voice. An elderly man stood from the back corner where he'd been sitting so quietly, I hadn't even registered his presence. He was mid-70s, slight build, wearing a well-tailored suit that had probably been expensive 20 years ago. His face was deeply lined, his white hair neatly combed, and his eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone who'd spent decades watching people reveal themselves in moments of crisis. "My name is Harold Harris," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite its softness. "I was James Reed's personal attorney for 30 years, since before most of you were born." Walter Morrison looked up from his papers, shock breaking through his professional composure. "Harold, what are you doing here? I wasn't informed." "You weren't meant to be." Harris moved toward the conference table with slow, deliberate steps, carrying a worn leather portfolio. "I'm here to execute my client's final wishes, the real ones." My father shot to his feet, his face transforming from smug satisfaction to something I'd rarely seen, panic. "This is highly irregular. Morrison is the family attorney. Whatever you have is unauthorized." "Morrison handles family business affairs," Harris interrupted calmly, placing the portfolio on the table. "I handled James's personal affairs. There's a difference, Richard. You should know you've been trying to find my files for months." The room erupted. Aunt Martha demanded to know what was happening. Uncle Tom called this inappropriate. Cousin Jake's wife whispered loudly about legal challenges, but I couldn't move, couldn't process what I was hearing. Another attorney. Personal affairs. My father had been looking for files. James Reed came to me 2 years ago. Harris continued speaking over the noise with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, with concerns about what might happen after his death. He suspected that his will might be influenced, altered, or misrepresented. He wanted protection against that possibility. "My father had dementia," Richard said quickly. Too quickly. Everyone knows he was confused toward the end. "Your father passed 3 separate cognitive assessments in the 6 months before his death," Harris said, opening the portfolio and extracting documents. "All administered by independent physicians. His mental competency is thoroughly documented. Would you like me to read their findings aloud?" Richard's face flushed red, but he said nothing. Harris turned his attention to me, and for the first time since I'd entered this room, someone looked at me like I was a person rather than an inconvenience. "Ashley Reed, Your grandfather created a secondary will with specific trigger conditions. If his primary will showed clear favoritism inconsistent with his expressed wishes and values, the secondary will would automatically supersede it. The words weren't making sense. Secondary will, trigger conditions, supersede. I felt like I was hearing them through water. Your grandfather told me, and I quote, "If Ashley receives anything less than fair treatment, it proves Richard interfered with my wishes. That's when you activate the real will." Harris held my gaze. "Miss Reed, you just received $10 while your sister received $10 million. I would characterize that as considerably less than fair treatment." The room exploded again. Richard was shouting about legal procedures. Morrison was demanding to see documentation. Olivia looked between me and Dad, her face pale. Relatives argued with each other, voices overlapping into chaos. Someone said this was a scam. Someone else mentioned contesting. Aunt Martha declared it was disgraceful to disrupt a will reading. Through it all, I sat frozen, staring at Harold Harris while my mind tried to catch up with reality. Grandpa had suspected interference. He'd created a backup plan. He'd designed a test one that my father had apparently failed spectacularly by giving me $10. But what if this was a mistake? What if Harris was wrong or confused or had been manipulated himself? What if I let myself hope, and this turned out to be another humiliation crueler than the first because it came with false promise? Harris reached into his portfolio and extracted a sealed envelope, aged and slightly yellowed. My name was written across it in Grandpa's handwriting. I'd recognize those careful letters anywhere. "Your grandfather wrote this for you personally," Harris said, extending it toward me. "He instructed me to give it to you only if the scenario we both feared came true, that you'd be publicly humiliated at the reading. He wanted you to know in his own words why this happened and what happens next." My hands trembled as I stared at the envelope. Inside was Grandpa's voice speaking to me from beyond death. Inside were answers I desperately needed and was terrified to receive. Opening it meant everything would change. It meant war with my father, who I could see was already calculating his legal response. It meant believing I'd been worthy all along, that 6 years of distance and doubt had been based on lies. It meant trusting that Grandpa had seen me, really seen me, and tried to protect me, even knowing he wouldn't be there to witness it. But what if the second will was contested? What if this dragged on for months? Years bleeding me dry financially and emotionally? What if I opened that letter and found nothing but more pain dressed up as love? "Don't open that, Ashley." My father's voice cut through my spiral of doubt. His tone had shifted to something approaching reasonableness, the voice he used when he wanted to appear rational to outsiders. "This is clearly a scam. This man," he gestured dismissively at Harris, "is taking advantage of your grief. Don't let yourself be manipulated." I looked at my father's face and saw the truth beneath his mask, fear. He was afraid of what that envelope contained, afraid of what the secondary will would reveal. And if Richard Reed was afraid, it meant something real was happening. Harris waited patiently, the envelope still extended toward me. The room had gone quiet, everyone watching to see what I'd do. Olivia's eyes were wide. My mother looked between me and Richard, torn, as always. Aunt Martha sat with her arms crossed, clearly disapproving of this entire development. I thought about Mrs. Patterson's words. "Your father was very involved in James's care those final months. Very involved." I thought about the calls from Grandpa that never came through the silence I'd interpreted as rejection. I thought about 35 years of being told my worth could be measured in how little I deserved. My hand reached out, trembling, and took the envelope. "If Grandpa wanted me to hear this," I said, my voice stronger than I felt, "I will." I broke the seal with trembling hands. The paper inside was thick, expensive stationery that Grandpa had always used for important correspondence. His handwriting filled the page, those careful, slightly shaky letters I'd memorized from years of thank you notes. I started reading aloud, my voice cracking almost immediately. "My dearest Ashley, if you're reading this, it means I was right. Your father tried to erase you even from my final act of love." The room went silent. I forced myself to continue. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I never protected you enough while I was alive. I was a coward who chose peace with my son over justice for you. I watched him diminish you your entire life. I said nothing when he destroyed your lemonade stand. I said nothing when he stole your college fund to pay his debts. I said nothing when he told people you abandoned the family when the truth is he drove you away. My silence was complicity. This will is my apology and my attempt to finally do right by you. My voice broke completely on the last sentence. Tears blurred the remaining words, but I'd read enough. The letter fell from my hands onto the table as the truth of it settled over the room like a shroud. Grandpa had known. He'd seen everything, and he'd done nothing to stop it while he was alive. He stole her college fund, someone whispered. I think it was Olivia. My father stood frozen, his face a mask I couldn't read. Harris picked up the letter carefully, as if it were evidence, which I supposed it was. He folded it and handed it back to me, then turned to address the room. Before I read the terms of the actual will, I need to correct some misperceptions in this room. His voice carried the weight of decades of legal practice. I've heard several people question Ashley Reed's accomplishments, imply she abandoned her family, suggest she was absent from James's life. Let me clarify the facts. He extracted a document from his portfolio. Ashley Reed owns and operates Reed Financial Consulting in Seattle. The firm currently manages $8.2 million in assets for 47 clients. Her client retention rate is 96%, among the highest in the industry. Last year, her personal income was $340,000. She owns her condominium outright and has zero debt. I felt my face burn as every person in the room turned to stare at me. This was information I'd never shared with them, success I'd never bragged about because no one had ever asked. Furthermore, Harris continued, she's been featured in Forbes and Financial Planning magazine for her innovative approach to retirement planning. Your grandfather followed her success closely because she sent him every article, every achievement, every milestone, hoping one day her family might acknowledge them. The silence in the room had changed texture. It was no longer the embarrassed quiet of people witnessing humiliation. It was the uncomfortable quiet of people realizing they'd been wrong. Ashley didn't need her grandfather's money, Harris said, looking at my father. She needed her family to see her. That's what was stolen from her, not inheritance, but recognition. Aunt Martha looked stricken. Uncle Tom had the decency to look ashamed. Even Cousin Jake had stopped smirking. Harris opened the leather portfolio fully. Now let me read James Reed's actual last will and testament. The document you heard earlier was as James intended a test, one that Richard Reed failed spectacularly. My father moved as if to speak, but Harris held up a hand. To my granddaughter, Ashley Reed. Harris read clearly. I leave 65% controlling interest in Reed Family Holdings, including all property investments and business assets. The room erupted, but I couldn't hear the specific words. Blood was rushing in my ears. 65%, controlling interest. The family company that my father had run badly, apparently, for 15 years. To my granddaughter, Olivia Reed, I leave her $10 million as stated, but held in trust with specific conditions designed to protect her, not punish her. I glanced at Olivia, whose face had gone pale. Harris continued reading. To my son Richard Reed, I leave the memories of a father who loved him, but could no longer respect him. He paused, letting those words land. To my daughter-in-law, Linda Reed, I leave a path to freedom should she choose to take it. My mother made a small sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The estate, Harris explained, closing the will, is worth approximately $15 million. Ashley Reed now controls Reed Family Holdings, all associated real estate, and the investment portfolio. The terms are specific and legally binding. There is a no contest clause. Anyone who challenges this will forfeit all claims to the estate entirely. The room exploded into chaos. People were shouting, standing, gesturing. Someone demanded to see the documents. Someone else called this insane. Aunt Martha looked like she might faint. But I was watching my father. His face had gone from pale to red to a deep purple rage building like a physical force. When he spoke, his voice shook with an anger I'd rarely heard even from him. "This family still belongs to me." He wasn't shouting. That somehow made it worse. The words came out quiet, controlled, deadly. "I built this company. I maintained this house. I managed my father's affairs when he was too old to do it himself. You," he pointed at me with a shaking finger, "abandoned us. You ran away to Seattle to play at having a career while the rest of us did the actual work of maintaining a family legacy. And now you think you can walk in here after 6 years and take everything?" Richard Morrison tried to intervene. "No." My father turned on the attorney. "This is fraudulent. My father wasn't competent. He was manipulated by this," he gestured at Harris, "this opportunist who's been feeding lies to a confused old man." "The medical records prove otherwise," Harris said calmly, "as does the no contest clause. Challenge this will and you forfeit everything, including any indirect claims through your daughters." My father's hands clenched into fists. For a moment I thought he might actually become violent. Then he turned to me and the look on his face was pure hatred. "You will not take this family from me." My father stood in the center of the conference room radiating fury, and I realized with sudden clarity that this was the first time in my life I'd seen him genuinely afraid. Not angry afraid, because for once, something was happening that he couldn't control. "This will is invalid," he announced to the room, his voice regaining its authoritative tone. "My father was clearly mentally incompetent when he wrote it. He was manipulated by this," he gestured at Harris with contempt, "this opportunist who took advantage of an elderly man's confusion." "Richard, perhaps we should discuss this privately," Morrison began, but my father cut him off. "No. This ends now. Attorney Morrison, I'm formally contesting this will. I want papers filed today." Morrison looked deeply uncomfortable, caught between two clients and a situation spiraling beyond his expertise in small-town estate law. He cleared his throat. "Richard, that's certainly your right, but—" "Today," my father repeated, "I want this fraudulent document challenged immediately." Morrison nodded reluctantly. "I'll prepare the contest filing this afternoon." Harris had remained perfectly calm throughout the entire exchange, and when he spoke his voice carried no emotion whatsoever. "As is your right under Idaho probate law. You have 120 days to file a formal contest, though obviously you're moving faster than that. But Richard, let me be clear about what you're doing." He gathered his documents with careful precision. "James anticipated exactly this reaction. Every conversation we had over the past 2 years was recorded with his full knowledge and consent. Idaho is a one-party consent state. Those recordings are perfectly admissible. His mental competency is documented by 3 independent physicians, not doctors you chose or I chose, but neutral experts. He passed cognitive assessments, memory tests, and capacity evaluations 1 week before his death. His mind was sound. His intentions were clear. You manipulated him. Challenge the will." Harris continued speaking over my father. "That's your legal right. But know this, you will lose. James built an airtight case. What you'll accomplish is bankrupting yourself in legal fees, dragging your family through months of public litigation, and ultimately arriving at the exact same outcome. The second will stand." My father's face had gone from purple to a dangerous shade of red. "We'll see about that." He stormed toward the door, and I watched relatives make split-second decisions about which side to choose. Aunt Martha stood and followed him immediately. Of course she did. She'd spent 69 years never questioning her younger brother. Uncle Tom hesitated, then trailed after his wife. Cousin Jake and several others filed out behind them, a small army rallying to the familiar power structure. But not everyone left. Mrs. Patterson stayed in her corner seat, watching with those sharp eyes. A few cousins I barely knew remained looking uncertain. and Olivia sat frozen in her chair, staring at the table where two versions of our grandfather's will had just been revealed. After the room cleared, Harris approached me quietly. "We need to talk. Privately." We moved to Morrison's smaller office down the hall. Morrison himself had disappeared, probably to draft the contest paperwork, and wished he'd never taken on the Reed family as clients. Harris closed the door and turned to face me. "Here's the reality you need to understand. The court will schedule a probate hearing in approximately 90 days, possibly longer given how backed up the system is. Until that hearing concludes and a judge validates one will or the other, all estate assets are frozen. You can't touch anything, neither can your father." I sank into a chair trying to process. "So for 3 months, nothing happens." "Oh, plenty happens. We enter what's called discovery, both sides gathering evidence, taking depositions, building cases. Your father will try to prove mental incompetency or undue influence. Will prove his decades of financial manipulation and abuse. Will document every instance of him interfering with James's wishes, controlling access, misrepresenting your relationship with your grandfather. How ugly will this get?" Harris didn't sugarcoat it. "Very ugly. He'll attack your character, your business practices, your life choices. He'll try to paint you as a greedy opportunist who abandoned her family and came crawling back for money. He'll find people willing to testify to whatever narrative he's building. He'll dig into your personal life looking for anything he can use against you." My stomach churned. "And if he wins, if the judge believes him?" "Then the first will stands. Olivia receives her $10 million, you receive your $10, and your father effectively controls everything through her. He'll run the company into the ground while extracting whatever personal wealth he can before it collapses. That's his pattern. James documented it extensively." Harris leaned forward. "But Ashley, we won't lose. The evidence is overwhelming. Your grandfather was thorough because he knew exactly what Richard would do. Can you prove the college fund theft that he said in the letter? James kept records. Bank statements, transfer documents, correspondence with the college bursar's office. He knew what Richard had done, and he documented it. We have everything we need." I sat in silence, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of me. I could walk away. My father would probably offer a settlement, 100,000, maybe two, enough to make me disappear and let him maintain control. I could go back to Seattle, to my business, to the life I'd built. Or I could stay and fight. Harris stood. "Think about it tonight. Let me know your decision by Monday. If you're in, we need to move fast." I returned to the family house to pack my things, planning to find a hotel for however long I'd be staying. My mother was waiting in the living room, her hands twisting a tissue into shreds. "Ashley, please." She stood as I entered. "Please just let this go. Your father said he'll offer you $100,000 to settle. That's more than fair. Take it and go back to Seattle. Don't tear this family apart." I looked at my mother, really looked at her. She was 64 years old and looked 70. Every line on her face had been carved by years of choosing his peace over her own dignity. She'd spent 4 decades erasing herself to avoid conflict, and now she was asking me to do the same. "Mom, the family was torn apart when I was 8 years old, and Dad kicked over my lemonade stand because he was embarrassed by my ambition. It was torn apart every time I achieved something, and he found a way to dismiss it. It was torn apart when he stole my college fund and then told everyone I was too privileged to appreciate family sacrifice." My voice was steady, clear. "I didn't tear this family apart. I'm just finally admitting it was never whole." She stared at me, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He's your father." "Yes, and I'm his daughter. That should have meant something to him." I went upstairs, threw my clothes into my suitcase, and called my office manager in Seattle. "I need you to cancel everything on my calendar for the next 2 months. Refer urgent matters to Patricia. Tell clients I'm dealing with a family emergency and I'll be in touch." 2 months, Ashley, are you okay?" "I'm staying here," I said. "This ends now." My phone buzzed as I was carrying my suitcase to the car. A text from my father. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." I checked into the Cascade Lodge, a modest hotel on the edge of town that catered mostly to fishermen and tourists visiting the reservoir. It wasn't home, but it was neutral ground, a place where I could think without the weight of family history pressing down on me. That first night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the will, reading my father's face, Grandpa's letter. But somewhere around 3 a.m., something shifted inside me. I'd spent my entire life reacting to my father's judgment, running from his disapproval, trying to prove myself to people who'd decided I wasn't worth knowing. No more. By Monday morning, I had a plan. Harris had given me names, professionals he trusted, people who specialized in exactly the kind of family warfare we were entering. I started with Patricia Chen, a forensic accountant based in Boise, who'd built her reputation dismantling financial fraud in family businesses. We met at a coffee shop 40 minutes outside Cascade, away from local eyes and gossip. Patricia was 55, sharp-featured, with reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, and an intensity that made me sit up straighter. She listened to my summary of the situation without interrupting, occasionally making notes in a leather-bound notebook. "Let me be clear about what I do," she said when I finished. "I find money. I trace transactions. I document every financial irregularity, every suspicious transfer, every dollar that moved from where it should have been to where someone wanted it to go." She leaned forward. "If your father stole from you or your grandfather, I will find it. I've testified in over 200 cases. I know every trick, every shell game, every way people hide financial abuse. The question is, are you prepared for what I might discover? I need to know the truth. The truth isn't always comfortable. You might learn things about your family that you can't unknow. I'm already living with what I suspect. I'd rather have evidence." She smiled, then the first warmth I'd seen from her. "Good. I'll need access to all family financial records, bank statements, trust documents, business filings, tax returns. Everything your grandfather kept, everything your father controls. Can you get me that?" "Harris has Grandpa's records. The rest—" I paused. "That's what discovery is for, right?" "Exactly. Your father's attorney will be forced to produce documents. I'll know what to look for." Next, I hired Catherine Walsh, a probate litigator from Boise, who Harris had recommended with the kind of enthusiasm that suggested she was either brilliant or terrifying. Possibly both. Catherine was 48, red-haired, and had the demeanor of someone who'd spent decades watching rich men try to cheat their families and had learned to enjoy taking them apart in court. We met in her office, which was decorated with framed trial victories and photographs of her with various judges and politicians. "Harris sent me the basics," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "Second will incompetency contest, toxic patriarch, golden child dynamics. Standard stuff, honestly. What makes your case interesting is how thoroughly your grandfather documented everything. He handed us a gift." "My father's already filed the contest." "Of course he has. He's panicking. Men like him can't conceive of losing control." She pulled out a legal pad. "Here's what happens next. Discovery starts immediately. Both sides gather evidence, take depositions, build their cases. Your father will try to prove mental incompetency or undue influence. We'll prove decades of financial abuse and manipulation. How do I prepare? Document everything from this point forward. Every email, every text, every conversation. If your father threatens you, record it. Idaho's a one-party consent state, which means you can record conversations you're part of without the other person's knowledge. He's going to try intimidation. Let him. Every threat strengthens our case." She looked at me directly. "He'll attack your character, your business, your choices. He'll make this personal and ugly. Can you handle that?" I thought about 35 years of my father's judgment, his dismissal, his casual cruelty. "Yes." "Good, because we're going to win, but you need to be ready for the cost of victory." A week later, Harris called me to his office for a private meeting. We sat in his small conference room while rain drummed against the windows, and he opened a folder containing Olivia's trust documents. I want you to understand something about how your grandfather structured your sister's inheritance, he said. The 10 million isn't a lump sum. It's a trust that I administer as trustee. Olivia receives $500,000 per year for 20 years. That seems protective? It is. But here's the interesting part. He slid a page across the table. The trust document requires that I consult you before approving any disbursement over $50,000. I stared at the clause, reading it twice. He made me part of Olivia's financial decisions. Your grandfather knew your father would try to access Olivia's money. This structure prevents that Richard has no legal claim to funds in Olivia's trust. But it also means Olivia's financial security partially depends on you acting in good faith. I'm the final authority, but I must consult you first. So Grandpa made me Olivia's protector? Harris smiled slightly. He made you her equal. She can't be bought or manipulated by your father because she can't access the full sum. And you can't punish her because I'm the actual trustee, you're just a required consultation. It's brilliant, really. He forced you both toward fairness. I sat back, processing the elegance of it. Grandpa had seen the dynamics clearly, Olivia trapped by financial dependence, me shut out entirely. He'd restructured everything to make us equals, whether we wanted to be or not. 2 weeks into discovery, Patricia called with her first major finding. Her voice on the phone was carefully controlled, which I'd learned meant she was angry. I need you to come to Boise. There's something you need to see in person. I drove down that afternoon. Patricia's office was a converted warehouse space filled with filing cabinets, computer monitors, and the organized chaos of someone who lived in documents. She had papers spread across a conference table, bank records highlighted in different colors. Your grandfather established a college fund for you when you were born. $120,000 invested conservatively, designated specifically for your education. My stomach dropped. He told me when I was applying to colleges that he couldn't afford to help both me and Olivia, that he had to choose and Olivia needed it more because she wasn't as academically inclined. He lied. Patricia pointed to a spreadsheet. Disbursements from your fund, year 1 of college $30,000 withdrawn, year 2 $40,000, year 3 $30,000, year 4 $20,000, total $120,000 completely depleted by the time you graduated. But I took out student loans for all 4 years. I graduated with $95,000 in debt. Patricia slid bank records across the table. The money went to Reed Family Holdings to cover what your father classified as business shortfalls. In reality, failed investments and excessive personal draws. He raided your education fund to bail himself out, then told you there was no money for college because your grandfather couldn't afford 2 grandchildren's educations. She pulled out another set of documents. Meanwhile, Olivia's fund, also $120,000, remained completely untouched. She graduated debt-free. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just favoritism or emotional abuse. This was concrete, documented theft. My father had stolen my education fund, left me to drown in student loan debt, and then spent years telling people I was too proud to accept family help. You didn't just ignore me, I whispered. You stole from me. So Patricia's discovery of the college fund theft was just the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, my father launched a campaign designed not to win in court, but to destroy me socially before we ever got there. It started subtly. Aunt Martha posted on Facebook, praying for families torn apart by greed. Sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you deepest. No names mentioned, but everyone in Cascade knew exactly who she meant. Comments flooded in cousins, church friends, people I'd known my entire childhood, all expressing support for families under attack and parents betrayed by ungrateful children. Then the stories started spreading. I heard them third hand, fourth hand, the way gossip moves through small towns like wildfire. Ashley was mentally unstable. Ashley was obsessed with money she'd never earned. Ashley was trying to steal her grieving sister's inheritance out of pure jealousy. Ashley had abandoned her grandfather in his final years and now wanted to profit from his death. My father was strategic about it. He never directly accused me of anything actionable, nothing Catherine could use in court. He simply told his version of events to anyone who'd listen, painting himself as the devoted son and father betrayed by a daughter who'd always been difficult, always been resentful, always been wrong. The social isolation became suffocating. I went to the grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon and watched people I'd known my entire life actively avoid me. Mrs. Chen from the bakery, who used to give me cookies when I was little, turned her back when she saw me coming down the aisle. The pharmacist at Cascade Drugs, who'd given me lollipops after every prescription when I was a kid, processed my order with cold efficiency, no eye contact, no warmth. At the gas station, I overheard two women talking by the pump. "I heard she hasn't visited in 6 years and now she's trying to take everything from that poor family." The sister's devastated. I wanted to scream at them that I'd been sending Grandpa money for 3 years, that my father had stolen my education fund, that the poor family had been abusing me since childhood. But what would be the point? They'd already decided who I was. This was exactly what my father wanted. Make me so miserable, so isolated, so exhausted that I'd give up and leave. He was betting that I still cared what these people thought, that small-town shame would be enough to drive me away. 3 weeks into discovery, my mother appeared at my hotel room door. It was 8 in the evening, and she looked 10 years older than she had at the will reading. Her eyes were red and swollen makeup smeared from crying. "Ashley, please." She pushed past me into the room before I could decide whether to let her in. "Please, you have to stop this." "Mom, your father is having chest pains. Real ones. His blood pressure is dangerously high. The doctor said if this stress continues, he could have a heart attack." She grabbed my hands, her grip desperate. "Is money really worth your father's life? Is winning worth watching him die?" I pulled my hands away, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Mom, he stole $120,000 from me. He's been lying about me for 30 years. He intercepted calls from Grandpa so I'd think he didn't want to talk to me. And you're asking me to stop? He made mistakes. Mistakes." My voice rose despite my intention to stay calm. Theft isn't a mistake. Systematically destroying my relationship with my grandfather isn't a mistake. Telling an entire town that I'm a greedy, mentally unstable gold digger isn't a mistake. Those are choices. "He's still your father." Tears streamed down her face. "Family forgives. Family doesn't tear each other apart in court over money." Something in me snapped. Did he forgive me when I was 19 and needed $200 for textbooks, and he told me I should work harder? Did he forgive me when I couldn't come home for Christmas because I was working 3 jobs to pay loans? He created by stealing my education fund. Where was all this family forgiveness when I was struggling? My mother flinched. "He was tough on you because he wanted you to be strong. He was cruel to me because I didn't worship him the way Olivia did, because I had my own thoughts and ambitions and refused to be controlled." I sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly too tired to stand. "Mom, you've spent 40 years making excuses for him. 40 years choosing his comfort over everyone else's well-being. I'm not doing that anymore." She looked at me like I'd slapped her. "So you'd rather let him die?" "I'd rather let him face consequences for once in his life." She left without another word, and I sat alone in that sterile hotel room feeling like the worst person alive, even though I knew I was doing the right thing. Catherine had warned me he'll make it personal. He'll weaponize everything. And he was. 4 weeks into discovery, Patricia called me with an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Get to my office. Now. Don't tell anyone you're coming." I made the drive to Boise in under an hour, my mind racing through possibilities. When I arrived, Patricia had papers spread across every surface of her conference room, her face pale. "Ashley, we need to talk about Reed Family Holdings." She walked me through the analysis methodically, but the bottom line was devastating. The company wasn't just struggling, it was drowning. Total assets $5.2 million. Total liabilities $8.7 million. Net worth negative $3.5 million. Your grandfather's original business was worth $12 million when your father took over 15 years ago. Patricia said, her voice tight with controlled anger. He's systematically destroyed it. Bad investments, excessive personal draws, using company credit to maintain a lifestyle he can't afford. The mansion is mortgaged to 90% of its value. Everything that looks successful is leveraged to the breaking point. I stared at the numbers, trying to process. So if the estate is forced to assume the company, you'd be inheriting a financial disaster. $3.5 million in debt. That's probably why he's fighting so hard. Not to keep the company, but to stick you with the debts while he walks away clean. If the first will stands, Olivia inherits the cash, he controls the company through her, and when it collapses, you're the one holding the liability as majority shareholder. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me check. The text was short. Check your grandfather's medical records from his final months. Ask who controlled his medications. I stared at that text for a long time, my mind racing through implications I didn't want to consider. Who controlled his medications? But I couldn't chase that thread, yet I had to focus on what Patricia had just shown me on the immediate battle ahead. The discovery about the company's insolvency should have felt like a victory, more evidence of my father's mismanagement, more proof for our case. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, realizing the inheritance I was fighting for might be worthless. Or worse than worthless, a debt bomb designed to explode in my hands. But the financial warfare was almost easier to handle than what came next. The Cascade Chronicle ran an op-ed on Wednesday morning. I saw it when I stopped at the gas station for coffee. The headline read, "When Greed Destroys Family Values." My name was never mentioned. It didn't need to be. The piece was written by someone who signed it only as a concerned citizen and spoke vaguely about families torn apart by adult children who abandon their duties and then return demanding inheritance they never earned. It talked about the importance of respecting elders' wishes, about the sanctity of family loyalty, about how outsiders with law degrees and ulterior motives could manipulate vulnerable elderly people. Every person in that gas station knew exactly who it was about. I bought my coffee and left without making eye contact with anyone. My favorite coffee shop, Riverbend Cafe, had been my refuge during high school, the one place I could sit with a book and feel anonymous. I'd been going there since my return, grateful for the small comfort of familiar territory. But that Thursday, they got my order wrong. Just black coffee, the simplest order possible, came out as something with caramel and whipped cream. I sent it back. The next attempt was iced when I'd ordered hot. The third time, the barista, a girl I'd gone to high school with, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Maybe you should try Starbucks. We're really busy today." The cafe was nearly empty. I stopped going. Former classmates posted Instagram stories, carefully worded messages about loyalty, about family, about blood being thicker than water. They tagged each other, creating a web of social proof that I was the villain in this story. None of them tagged me. None of them needed to. The worst came when Mrs. Patterson called me, her voice shaking. Someone had left a note in her mailbox. "Stay out of family business that doesn't concern you, or we'll make sure you regret it." "I'm so sorry," I told her. "I never meant for you to be dragged into this." "Don't you apologize, Ashley Reed. I know exactly who you are and who your father is. I'm not scared of him." But I could hear the lie in her voice. She was 82 years old. Of course she was scared. The message was clear: leave or everyone who supports you will pay. My father was willing to burn down the entire town's goodwill toward me if that's what it took to win. But I stayed. I was done running from Richard Reed's threats. 6 weeks into discovery, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. Local area code. I almost didn't answer, expecting another anonymous threat. But something made me pick up. "Ashley." Olivia's voice was small, tentative. "Can you meet me? Not here. Somewhere Dad won't see?" We met at a park 30 minutes outside Cascade, a small playground near the reservoir that was deserted on a Tuesday afternoon. Olivia sat on a swing, pushing herself back and forth with her feet looking more like a lost child than a 31-year-old woman. "Dad's been coaching me," she said without preamble, "on what to say at the hearing. He has a whole script about how you and Grandpa weren't close, how you only visited once in 6 years, how you're doing this for money." She looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before, genuine anguish. "He wants me to testify against you. And what will you say?" She started crying, not prettily, but in great gulping sobs that shook her whole body. "I don't know he's my father, but Ash, I know you sent Grandpa money. I found the bank statements when I was helping clean out his house. $500 every month for 3 years. I saw your cards, your letters. You were the one who actually cared, not me." "Olivia, I visited him maybe 10 times in 3 years, and half those times I asked him for money." She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. "You were the good granddaughter. You were the one who stayed connected. And I'm the one getting $10 million. I sat on the swing next to her, the chains creaking. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about the money I sent?" "Because Dad would have been furious, and because—" She took a shaky breath. "When I was 19, I begged him to help you with college. I'd just gotten into state school fully funded by the family, and I knew you were drowning in debt. I asked him why he couldn't help you too." "What did he say?" "He screamed at me. I mean really screamed. Said you'd ruin everything if you ever had real resources. That you were dangerous because you didn't need us, and people who don't need you can't be controlled. He told me if I ever brought it up again, he'd cut me off entirely." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I didn't speak for 2 days. I was too scared." Something clicked into place. "You've always been scared of him." "Terrified. Because Ash, I'm not his favorite because he loves me more. I'm his favorite because I'm controllable." She looked at me with eyes that held decades of trapped desperation. "That condo in Boise? He owns it. I just live there. The gallery job, his friend owns it. I'm there as a favor to Dad. My car, my credit cards, my phone plan, all in his name. I'm 31 years old and I have $800 in personal savings. $800. That's everything I've ever managed to keep hidden from him." I stared at my sister, really seeing her for the first time. I'd spent my whole life thinking she was the golden child, the favored one, the daughter who got everything I'd been denied. But she'd been in a cage this whole time, a prettier cage than mine maybe, but just as confining. "You never escaped," I said softly. "No, you did. You left and built something he couldn't touch. I stayed and let him build my entire life. The trust Grandpa made, I was so angry at first. It felt like punishment. But it's not, is it? It's a rescue plan." Olivia nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "He saw what I couldn't, that I needed to be protected from Dad, from myself." "Olivia, testify honestly. Whatever you say at that hearing, say it because it's true, not because Dad told you to." She looked terrified. "If I don't do what he wants, then you start building your own life. It's hard. It's lonely. But it's yours." We sat there until the sun started setting, two sisters who'd been pitted against each other their entire lives, finally seeing each other clearly. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. "Dad found out I met with you. He's cutting off my credit cards until the hearing. I have $200 to my name." Olivia's text about being cut off crystallized something for me. I'd spent weeks reacting to my father's attacks, defending myself against his smear campaign, trying to survive the social isolation. But survival wasn't enough. If I was going to win this battle, I needed to stop playing defense and start going on offense. Catherine Walsh had said it during one of our strategy sessions. Start thinking past the probate hearing. If you win, you'll control Reed Family Holdings. But if the board doesn't respect you, they'll make your life hell. Start building relationships now. So I did. I obtained a list of the current board members from Harris, 6 people total. 4 were my father's longtime friends and business associates. 2 were professionals Grandpa had hired against Richard's wishes. Marcus Thompson, the CFO, and Sarah Chen, an outside director with expertise in corporate restructuring. I started with Marcus. We met for lunch at a restaurant in Boise, far from Cascade's prying eyes. He was 58, methodical, with the careful demeanor of someone who'd spent years watching bad management and keeping meticulous records in case anyone ever cared enough to look. "I appreciate you meeting with me," I said after we'd ordered. "I know this puts you in an awkward position." "Your father doesn't know I'm here, if that's what you're asking." He adjusted his glasses, studying me. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask the right questions." "What's your honest assessment of the company's financial health?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "It's dying, slowly but certainly. Your father treats company money as his personal bank account. Excessive draws, unapproved loans to himself, investments in ventures that benefit him personally rather than the company. I've documented every irregularity, every questionable transaction. I kept telling myself it wasn't my place to intervene, that maybe I was wrong about the severity." He paused. "But I wasn't wrong. The company your grandfather built is being bled dry. If I end up with controlling interest, what would you need from new leadership? Competent oversight, someone who understands fiduciary duty, someone who'll let me do my job without interference." He leaned forward. "Ashley, I'll be honest with you. If you win and actually try to save this company, I'll support you. If you're asking whether I'd testify to what I've documented, the answer is yes." Sarah Chen, the outside director, was even more direct when we met 2 days later. She'd seen the writing on the wall for years and had been preparing her resignation until she heard about the will contest. "Your grandfather hired me specifically because I specialize in turning around failing family businesses," she told me over coffee. "He knew what was happening. He brought me on to document it, to build a paper trail. If you win, I'll help you restructure. If your father wins, I'm gone within a week." These conversations gave me something I hadn't felt in months: hope, not just for winning the legal battle, but for actually building something worthwhile afterward. A week after my meeting with Sarah, Harris called me to his office with unusual urgency. He had that look he got when he was about to reveal something significant. "There's something in your grandfather's estate plan I haven't told you yet," he said, sliding a folder across his desk. "Your grandfather established a trust for your mother 15 years ago. For Mom. An irrevocable trust that automatically transfers $2,000 per month into an account in her name only. He set it up after he witnessed your father berate her for spending $50 on a haircut without permission. James was appalled. He said he'd never seen a man treat his wife that way over such a small amount." I did the math quickly. 15 years of deposits at $2,000 a month. Plus investment growth, the current balance is approximately $180,000. The trust is structured to continue for 20 years total, or until your mother's death. Your grandfather gave her a way out if she ever finds the courage to take it. "Does Dad know about this?" "No, and Linda doesn't know either. James asked me to tell her only when she's ready. I think that time might be now." I sat back processing this. Grandpa had seen my mother's trapped situation and quietly, methodically given her the financial means to leave. He'd done it 15 years ago, which meant he'd been planning, protecting, trying to fix things, long before any of us realized how bad it had gotten. "She'll be terrified," I said. "She's been with him for 40 years. Fear is what's kept her there. Maybe this will give her another option." While Harris worked on arranging to tell my mother about the account, I made another strategic decision. Catherine had been documenting everything building our case, but the court of public opinion mattered too. My father had controlled the narrative since the beginning. It was time to change that. I contacted a journalist I'd found through research, Michael Torres, an investigative reporter for Idaho Business Review who specialized in corporate financial crimes. I didn't go to him with gossip or accusations. I went with facts. Over the phone, I confirmed what he could easily verify through public records. Yes, I can confirm Reed Family Holdings is significantly indebted. Yes, I can confirm discrepancies in how family trust funds were managed. I'm not tearing my family apart. I'm telling the truth about how broken it's been for decades. I didn't name Patricia as my source. I didn't share confidential documents. but I pointed him toward public filings court records information that was already available if someone bothered to look. The article ran the following Tuesday: prominent Idaho family business under scrutiny amid estate dispute. It was careful, factual, scrupulously balanced. It mentioned the will contest, noted the allegations of financial mismanagement, quoted anonymous sources within the company about concerns regarding oversight. It didn't take sides, but it asked questions. Questions my father couldn't easily answer. Suddenly the narrative shifted. I wasn't the greedy daughter anymore. I was the whistleblower. The one exposing financial mismanagement that had gone unchecked for years. People who'd been avoiding me started looking uncertain. The town's certainty about who the villain was began to crack. My father's response was swift and desperate. Catherine called me Thursday afternoon, her voice tight with controlled excitement. Richard's attorney just filed an emergency motion to expedite the hearing. They want it moved up from 90 days to 30 days. Why would they do that? Don't they need more time to build their case? That's exactly my point. They're panicking. The longer this drags out, the more we discover the more public sentiment shifts. They want to get in front of a judge before we can finish discovery, before Marcus and Sarah go on record, before your mother learns about her account. Catherine's satisfaction was audible. This is good for us, Ashley. Desperate people make mistakes, and your father just made a big one. Richard's emergency motion hung over everything like a storm cloud, but Harris insisted we proceed with telling my mother about the account. If we wait until after the hearing, the moment will have passed, he said. She needs to know now while she still has time to make a choice. I called my mother and asked her to meet me not at the hotel where my father's allies might see, but at Harris's office. She arrived looking nervous, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. Ashley, I don't know if I should be here. Your father doesn't know. Mom, please, just sit down and listen. Harris greeted her with the gentle formality he did everything, offering coffee she declined with shaking hands. Then he opened a folder and began to explain. Mrs. Reed, your father-in-law loved you very much. He knew your marriage was difficult. He wanted you to know you always had a choice. He slid account statements across the desk. My mother stared at them, her face going progressively paler as her eyes traced the numbers. $180,000. Her voice was barely a whisper. I don't understand. This is my name, but I didn't open this account. Your grandfather opened it 15 years ago, I said gently. He set up a trust that deposits $2,000 every month. He did it after he saw Dad humiliate you over a haircut. He wanted you to have freedom. Freedom, she repeated the word like it was foreign. I can't just leave a 40-year marriage. What would people think? What would the church say? I'm 64 years old. Where would I even go? Mom. I reached across the desk and took her hand. What do you think? Not Dad, not the church, not the neighbors. You. When was the last time you made a decision just for yourself? She sat in silence for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. I can't remember. I stopped trying after you left. I realized if I just stayed quiet, there was peace. Conflict was worse than invisibility. She looked at me with something that might have been envy. You were brave enough to leave. I never was. You can be now. That evening, my mother went home. I didn't know what she'd do, whether the account would give her courage, or whether 40 years of conditioning would pull her back into silence. I sat in my hotel room, trying not to hope, trying not to imagine what it would feel like to have my mother finally choose me. My phone rang at 8:47. My mother's voice was shaking but clear. I did it. I said no. What happened? He demanded I call you and tell you to drop the case. He had a whole script written out, things I was supposed to say about family loyalty and respecting your father. And I said no. She laughed, a sound somewhere between joy and hysteria. He looked at me like I'd spoken in tongues. He said, "What did you say?" And I said it again louder. No, I won't do it. Ashley is our daughter, and you've treated her like garbage her entire life. I've watched it. I've enabled it. I'm ashamed of myself, but I'm done." "Oh, Mom." "He told me if I didn't support him, I could leave the house right now." Her voice wavered, but held. "So I said okay. I packed a bag and I left. Ashley, I'm in my car. I don't know where to go." "Come to the hotel, room 237. Come right now." She arrived 20 minutes later, a single suitcase, and a look of stunned disbelief on her face. I opened the door and she stood there, this woman who'd spent 40 years shrinking herself, and said, "I left him. I actually left him." I pulled her into the room and hugged her, really hugged her for the first time in years. We both cried her for the decades she'd lost me, for finally having a mother who chose me. The next morning, Olivia's text appeared in the family group chat that I'd muted months ago but never left. I only saw it because my mother's phone dinged and she showed me her hand shaking. Olivia had written, "I've been thinking about the hearing. I'm going to tell the truth, all of it. Dad, I love you, but I won't lie for you. Grandpa and Ashley were close. She did care for him, and I think his second will reflect what he really wanted. I'm sorry, but this is my choice." My father's response came within seconds. "You're both dead to me. You've chosen a liar and a thief over your own father. Don't come crawling back when she destroys everything." Olivia's next text was in a separate thread, just to me and Mom. I blocked his number. "I'm coming to Cascade. Can I stay with you guys?" That night, the 3 Reed women sat together in my cramped hotel room. Olivia arrived with 2 suitcases and red eyes. Mom still looked shell-shocked. I felt like I was in an alternate reality where my family actually functioned. We ordered Chinese takeout because none of us had the energy to go anywhere public. We sat on the beds and floor eating lo mein straight from containers, and slowly, tentatively, we started talking. Not about the case or Dad or the hearing, but about other things, small things. Olivia told a story about a disastrous date. Mom admitted she'd always wanted to learn to paint, but Dad had said it was a waste of money. I described my apartment in Seattle, the view of the city, the life I'd built. Somewhere around 10 p.m., we put on an old movie, some romantic comedy from the 90s, and actually laughed. Real laughter, the kind that comes from relief and exhaustion, and the giddy feeling of having jumped off a cliff and discovering you could fly. Mom said quietly during a commercial, "I should have done this 30 years ago." "You did it now," I told her. "That's what matters." Olivia curled up on the other bed, looking younger than 31. "I was so scared of him. I still am, but I'm more scared of ending up like—" She stopped, horrified. "Like me," Mom said gently. "It's okay. I know what I became." "You're becoming someone else now," I said. We fell asleep with the TV still on 3 women who'd been pitted against each other for decades, finally on the same side. What we didn't know, what we couldn't know, was that while we were forging our alliance, Richard was across town meeting with a private investigator, paying him $10,000 to find anything at all that could destroy all 3 of us. The fragile alliance between me, my mother, and Olivia lasted exactly 5 days before my father's counterattack began. Catherine called on a Monday morning, her voice tight with controlled frustration. "Richard's attorney filed new evidence with the court. We need to talk." I drove to her office in Boise, my stomach knotting with each mile. Catherine spread documents across her conference table, and I saw immediately why she was concerned. "Security footage from your grandfather's assisted living facility," she explained, pointing to time-stamped logs. "Shows Harris visiting James Reed 17 times in his final 3 months. Richard's attorney is arguing this proves undue influence, that Harris manipulated a vulnerable elderly man through repeated contact. Grandpa wasn't in assisted living. He lived in his own house until the week before he died." "I know that. You know that. But the footage is real. It's from Cascade Senior Services, where James went for physical therapy twice a week. Harris met him there because James couldn't drive anymore, and your father controlled access to the house." She flipped to another document. "They're also submitting edited text messages supposedly showing you asking your grandfather for money." I leaned over to read them. The messages were mine, but crucial context had been stripped away. "Can I send you $500 this month?" read one. "I know expenses have been tight." What was missing? Grandpa's response, accepting the help, his thank you messages, the entire conversation, showing I was offering support, not asking for it. "And there's a testimony from a nurse named Patricia Holbrook," Catherine continued. "She claims James was confused and disoriented in his final weeks, possibly not competent to make legal decisions." "Who is she?" "A member of your father's church who provided respite care twice during James's last month." "Twice, Ashley. She saw him for a total of maybe 8 hours, and now she's claiming he was incompetent. This is all fabricated, twisted. It's unethical, bordering on fraudulent, but it's enough to make Judge Thornton pause. She's requesting additional review, which means postponing the hearing another 30 days. Catherine sat back, looking exhausted. "It extends your limbo, depletes your resources, and gives your father more time to manufacture problems." The postponement felt like a physical blow. 4 months of battle, and we were no closer to resolution. Worse, every additional month meant more attorney fees I couldn't afford, and more time for my father to undermine everything we'd built. The next blow came from Marcus Thompson. He called me Wednesday evening, his voice strained. "Ashley, I need to be honest with you. Your father came to see me today with a very specific threat. He said if you take control of the company, you'll liquidate assets to pay your legal fees, and everyone will lose their jobs. He's convinced 2 board members that working with you means unemployment." "That's not true. I'm not liquidating anything." "I believe you. But he's also made it clear that if I testify on your behalf, he'll make my life very difficult. He has connections with my daughter's employer. He implied things could become complicated for her." My stomach dropped. "Marcus, I would never ask you to risk your family." "I know, but I need you to understand what you're walking into. Even if you win the probate hearing, even if the will is validated, you're inheriting a company where half the board sees you as the enemy. Your father is making sure that your victory will be worthless." Sarah Chen called the next day with similar news. She'd been offered a position at a firm in Denver, significantly more money, starting immediately, contingent on her withdrawing from any involvement in the Reed family holdings situation. "It's a bribe," she said flatly. "A very generous one. I wanted you to know before I make my decision." I thanked her for her honesty and hung up, feeling the walls close in. Catherine's warning echoed in my head. "Even if we win, probate taking control might be impossible if the board actively resists. Your father is making your inheritance worthless, all debt, no cooperation." That night, I sat alone in my hotel room and did the math I'd been avoiding. I'd spent $85,000 in legal fees over 4 months. Money I'd saved for years. Money that was supposed to be my security. My business in Seattle was struggling. I'd been checking in remotely, but it wasn't the same. 2 clients had left for competitors who could give them daily attention. My office manager was overwhelmed. My reputation, carefully built over years, was eroding because I was absent. Here in Cascade, I was a pariah. My mother was traumatized, living in a hotel room at 64 because I'd encouraged her to leave her marriage. Olivia was broke, cut off from everything she'd known, scared and dependent on me for support. And what was I fighting for? A company that was $3.5 million in debt. A family that had never loved me. An inheritance that might bankrupt me rather than save me. Maybe my father was right. Maybe I should have taken the $10 and walked away. Maybe I was bankrupting myself not for justice, but for pride, for the stubborn need to prove him wrong after 35 years of being told I was worthless. I called Catherine at 10 p.m., knowing she'd still be working. "I need you to be honest with me," I said, my voice hollow. "Can we actually win this? Not just the probate hearing, but everything after? Or am I destroying myself for a victory that means nothing?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "The probate hearing, yes. I believe we'll win that. Your grandfather's will is solid, the evidence overwhelming. But after what you're inheriting, what you'll have to fight to keep Ashley, I don't know. Your father is scorching the earth. Even if we win every legal battle, you might lose the war." After we hung up, I lay in the dark hotel room and let myself admit what I'd been denying for weeks. I was terrified that I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, that I'd sacrificed everything for a fight I couldn't win. My phone rang at 2 a.m., Harris's name on the screen. I answered groggily. "Ashley." His voice carried an urgency I'd never heard before. "I found something in your grandfather's safe deposit box. A second one the bank just notified me about. You need to come to my office right now. It's 2 a.m. Everything changes. Come now." I drove to Harris's office in the pre-dawn darkness, my mind foggy from 2 hours of sleep and the emotional exhaustion of questioning everything. The town was silent, streetlights casting yellow pools on empty sidewalks. Harris's building was dark, except for the second floor where light spilled from his office windows. He met me at the door looking more alert than anyone had a right to be at 2:30 in the morning. In his hand was a manila envelope worn at the edges with a bank logo stamped in the corner. "Your grandfather had a second safe deposit box," he said without preamble, leading me upstairs. "I didn't know about it. He deliberately kept it separate from his main estate documents. The bank only revealed it when they were processing final account closures and found the rental agreement in his name." We entered his office and he closed the door, then spread the envelope's contents on his desk. USB drives, 4 of them each labeled with dates spanning the past 5 years. Inside were these: audio recordings, dozens of conversations between James and Richard recorded with James's full knowledge and consent whenever Richard visited. Your grandfather documented everything. My exhausted brain struggled to process. He recorded Dad. Idaho is a one-party consent state. As long as one person in the conversation knows they're being recorded, it's perfectly legal. James knew. Richard didn't. Harris plugged one of the drives into his computer. "I've been listening to these for the past 3 hours. Ashley, they're damning. And I mean legally, criminally damning." He clicked on a file dated 18 months ago. My father's voice filled the small office and I felt my spine stiffen reflexively. "Dad, you need to simplify this will. All these trusts and conditions, it's going to cause problems. Just make it clean. Everything to Olivia, a token amount to Ashley. She'll accept it because she doesn't expect anything anyway." Grandpa's voice weaker but clear. "That's not fair to Ashley." "Fair." My father's laugh was cruel. "She abandoned this family. She chose Seattle over us. Why should she benefit from your life's work when she couldn't be bothered to visit? She sent me money every month. She called every week until someone told her I was too busy to talk." A pause. Then my father carefully, "She probably felt guilty. Anyway, Olivia's the one who needs this. She can't manage on her own." Harris skipped ahead to another recording, this one from 8 months ago. "You know, Dad Ashley will never know about that college fund. Who's she going to believe? You're going to tell her you used her money to save the business. She'll just think you favored Olivia. Which, let's be honest, you should have. At least Olivia stayed." I felt sick. He was bragging about it. Bragging to Grandpa about stealing from me. "Richard, I know what you did was wrong." "It was necessary. The business needed capital. What was I supposed to do? Let it fail? Ashley's fine. She figured out student loans. Made her tougher, probably." Harris clicked on another file, this one from 6 months before Grandpa's death. My father's voice had a different quality here, more aggressive, almost threatening. "Dad, just make the will simple. Everything to Olivia, nothing to Ashley. I'll manage Olivia's money. You know she'll do what I say. I've kept her dependent on purpose. She can't even pay her own phone bill without me. Once you're gone, I'll control the inheritance. Pay off my business debts, keep the family house, and finally be free of your constant judgment." "And if I don't agree?" Grandpa's voice was shaky but firm. "Then I'll contest whatever will you make. I'll tie it up in courts for years. Either way, I win. You need to decide if you want your legacy protected or destroyed." A pause. "Think about it. Ashley gave up on this family years ago. She'll get nothing, and she'll accept it because she's been accepting scraps her whole life. The Reed family will finally be mine to run my way." The recording ended. I sat in stunned silence, my hands shaking. That last statement, "She's been accepting scraps her whole life," hit like a physical blow because it was exactly what he'd trained me to do. Accept less. Expect less. Believe I deserved less. Harris closed the laptop. There are 17 recordings like this. Each one documents Richard pressuring, manipulating, or threatening your grandfather. Some include specific admissions of financial misconduct. All of them prove undue influence and coercion. Can we use them in court? Better than that. These recordings trigger a specific clause in the second will I didn't fully understand until now. He pulled out Grandpa's will and pointed to a section I'd never paid attention to. Your grandfather wrote, "If Richard Reed attempts to manipulate, coerce, or contest this will through fraudulent means, he is automatically disinherited entirely and forfeits all claims to my estate, including any expectation of inheritance through his daughters." He looked up at me. Furthermore, it states his actions may constitute criminal coercion and financial elder abuse under Idaho Code Section 18-15. Your grandfather built a legal bomb. The no contest clause wasn't for you or Olivia. It was for Richard. He just didn't know it. So if we present these recordings, your father doesn't just lose the will contest. He's automatically disinherited. He has no claim to anything, not through Olivia, not through the company, nothing. And depending on how aggressive the prosecutor wants to be, he could face criminal charges for elder abuse and coercion. I stood and walked to the window, watching dawn break over Cascade. 4 months of my father's attacks. 4 months of character assassination, social isolation, manufactured evidence. 4 months of him trying to destroy me. And Grandpa had seen it all coming. He'd documented it. He'd built a trap and waited for my father to walk into it. I called Catherine, not caring that it was 3 a.m. She answered on the second ring alert. "Catherine, Harris found recordings. Everything. We have him." There was a pause. Then Catherine's voice came through, cold and precise. "Now we go nuclear. He wanted a war. He's got one." The probate hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in early May, exactly 4 months and 3 weeks after Grandpa's death. The Ada County Courthouse in downtown Boise was a modern building, all glass and steel, nothing like the historic courthouses you see in movies. But when Catherine and I arrived at 9:30, it felt plenty dramatic. The hallway outside Magistrate Thornton's courtroom was packed. I recognized faces from Cascade relatives, neighbors, church members who'd come for the spectacle. This was small-town entertainment, a wealthy family tearing itself apart in public. I saw Aunt Martha holding court with a group of cousins, Uncle Tom looking uncomfortable beside her. Several board members from Reed Family Holdings stood in a cluster, carefully neutral. My father arrived at 9:45 with his attorney, Morrison, looking polished and confident. He'd brought character witnesses, people ready to testify about his devotion to Grandpa, about my absence, about Olivia's faithful care. He was playing this like he'd already won. I arrived with Catherine, Harris, Patricia, and 3 expert witnesses we'd retained. Linda walked on one side of me, Olivia on the other. That visual statement, the 3 Reed women standing together, sent whispers through the crowd. At precisely 10 a.m., we filed into the courtroom. Magistrate Ellen Thornton presided, a woman in her late 60s with steel-gray hair pulled back severely and reading glasses on a chain. She had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and zero tolerance for courtroom drama. She banged her gavel once. "This is a legal proceeding, not a public spectacle. I will hear evidence, not emotions. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed. Are we clear?" Her gaze swept the gallery. "Let's proceed." Morrison stood to present Richard's case. He was nervous, I could see it in how he adjusted his tie, cleared his throat twice before speaking. "Your Honor, this case concerns the tragic manipulation of an elderly, vulnerable man. James Reed was 89 years old at the time of his death. In his final months, He was increasingly isolated from his family by attorney Harold Harris and his estranged granddaughter Ashley Reed, who saw an opportunity for financial gain. The original will prepared with full legal protocol reflects James's true wishes to provide generously for his devoted granddaughter Olivia, who remained in Idaho and faithfully cared for him. They called their witnesses. The nurse Patricia Holbrook testified that Grandpa had seemed confused and disoriented during her visits. Morrison presented the edited text messages suggesting I'd been asking Grandpa for money. He showed the security footage of Harris's frequent visits, implying undue influence. Then Catherine stood for cross-examination, and I watched her dismantle everything with surgical precision. "Mrs. Holbrook, how many times did you actually care for James Reed?" "I visited twice in his final month." "Twice? For how many hours total?" "About 4 hours each time. 8 hours of contact. And based on 8 hours with a man you barely knew. You're testifying he was incompetent to manage his legal affairs." "He seemed confused. Did he remember your name?" "Well, yes." "Did he know where he was, what day it was, who the president was?" "Yes, but—" "So he was oriented to person, place, and time. What specific behaviors suggested incompetency?" The nurse floundered. Catherine moved on to the text messages presenting full conversations that showed I'd been offering support, not asking for it. She brought up phone records showing my regular calls to Grandpa until someone she let that word hang started screening them. For the security footage, she produced Harris's appointment logs. These visits were scheduled physical therapy sessions. Mr. Harris met his client there because James could no longer drive and preferred privacy for legal discussions rather than meeting at home where certain family members might overhear. Then Catherine presented our evidence. Medical records from 3 independent physicians certifying Grandpa's mental competency, cognitive assessment scores that were above average for his age, documentation of his financial management continuing until days before his death. "Your Honor, there was no incompetence here. There was only inconvenience for a son who wanted to control his father's legacy and discovered his father had other plans." I watched my father's confidence drain with each piece of evidence. His attorney was sweating now, whispering urgently, but there was nothing to whisper about. The case was collapsing. Then Catherine said the words I'd been waiting to hear. "Your Honor, we'd like to present audio evidence recorded by James Reed himself with his full consent, documenting attempts by Richard Reed to coerce changes to his estate plan." The courtroom erupted. Richard half stood from his chair. Morrison tried to object, but didn't know on what grounds. Judge Thornton banged her gavel. "Order. Attorney Walsh, you may proceed." Catherine played 3 recordings. The courtroom was silent, except for my father's voice, tinny through the speakers, but unmistakably clear. His manipulation, his contempt, his admission about stealing my college fund. And finally, the worst one. "She'll accept scraps because she's been accepting them her whole life. The Reed family will finally be mine to run my way." I heard gasps throughout the gallery. Aunt Martha's face had gone pale. Even Morrison looked horrified, realizing for the first time perhaps that his client had lied to him about everything. When the recording ended, Judge Thornton removed her glasses and looked directly at my father. "Mr. Reed, does your attorney wish to respond to these recordings?" Morrison leaned in, whispering frantically to my father. Richard's face had gone from white to red, his hands clenched into fists. Then he stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. "This is a setup," his voice cracked with rage or panic or both. "My father was sick. That lawyer poisoned his mind against me. This is all lies, manufactured evidence designed to destroy me and steal my inheritance." Judge Thornton's gavel slammed down. "Mr. Reed, sit down and be silent, or I will hold you in contempt of court." But my father couldn't stop. The control he'd maintained his entire life had finally shattered, and 35 years of rage came pouring out. "I built that company. I sacrificed my life for this family. My father was a senile old man who let a manipulative little bitch whisper in his ear because she wanted money." Morrison grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back to his seat, but my father shook him off. He pointed directly at me, his finger trembling with fury. "You were nothing. You were always nothing. I gave you life. I gave you a home, and this is how you repay me." Spittle flew from his mouth. "She's stealing from her own sister, from her own mother. She—" "Bailiff!" Judge Thornton's voice cut through the courtroom like a whip. "Remove Mr. Reed immediately." Two security officers moved toward my father. He tried to keep talking, but they each took an arm and physically escorted him toward the door. His voice echoed through the courtroom even as they dragged him out. "This isn't over. She'll destroy everything. She's destroying this family." The door closed behind them and sudden silence descended. Morrison stood at the defense table, his face the color of old paper. He turned to the judge, his voice shaking. "Your Honor, I apologize profusely for my client's behavior. I had no knowledge he would react this way." "Noted, Counselor. Sit down." I sat perfectly still in my chair, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness or even anger, but something closer to release. For 35 years I'd wondered if I was wrong about my father, if maybe I was too sensitive, too difficult, too broken to see his love beneath his criticism. But there it was, exposed for an entire courtroom to see the rage, the contempt, the absolute certainty that I was nothing. I wasn't wrong. I'd never been wrong. Olivia reached over and squeezed my hand. My mother sat frozen, staring at the door my father had been dragged through, and I wondered what she was thinking, whether she was seeing clearly for the first time, or mourning the man she'd convinced herself he was. Judge Thornton adjusted her glasses and looked at Catherine. "Attorney Walsh, please continue with your evidence." Catherine stood visibly shaken by what we'd just witnessed, but professionally composed. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Patricia Chen, forensic accountant, to the stand." Patricia walked to the witness stand with the calm confidence of someone who'd testified in hundreds of cases. She was sworn in, and Catherine began her direct examination. "Ms. Chen, can you summarize your findings regarding Richard Reed's financial management?" Patricia opened her report. "My analysis shows that over a period of approximately 15 years, Richard Reed systematically misappropriated funds from multiple sources. This includes $120,000 from Ashley Reed's college trust fund, diverted to cover Reed Family Holdings business losses. Additional irregularities include excessive personal draws from company accounts, totaling approximately $220,000 beyond his authorized compensation. The total financial harm I've documented is approximately $340,000. And who bore the burden of these misappropriations? Primarily Ashley Reed, who took out student loans to pay for education that should have been covered by her trust fund. Secondary harm to Reed Family Holdings and its investors, who saw company assets depleted for personal use. Catherine let that sink in before asking, "Is this behavior consistent with someone protecting family interests?" "No. This is consistent with systematic financial abuse and self-dealing." After Patricia, we called Marcus Thompson. He looked nervous as he took the stand. This was his employer's son he was about to testify against, but his voice was steady. "Mr. Thompson, as CFO of Reed Family Holdings, what's your assessment of Richard Reed's management?" "He's driven the company to near bankruptcy. When I started 7 years ago, we had a healthy balance sheet. Under his leadership, we've accumulated $8.7 million in debt against $5.2 million in assets. He takes excessive personal draws, makes investments that benefit him personally rather than the company, and dismissed repeated warnings from myself and Mr. Reed Sr. about our financial trajectory." Did James Reed try to intervene? Many times. Richard would tell the board that his father was getting old, didn't understand modern business was being paranoid. He reframed James's legitimate concerns as signs of senility. Was James Reed senile? Absolutely not. He was one of the sharpest businessmen I've ever known right up until his death. Catherine thanked him and sat down. Morrison cross-examined weakly, but there was nothing to attack. The evidence was overwhelming. Judge Thornton called for a 15-minute recess. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, staring at myself in the mirror. This was it. The moment everything would be decided. When we reconvened, Judge Thornton didn't waste time. I've reviewed all evidence presented in this matter. The testimony is clear and convincing. James Reed was of sound mind, acted of his own free will, and was fully aware of his estate decisions. The audio recordings demonstrate attempted coercion by the contestant, not undue influence on the decedent. The forensic evidence shows a pattern of financial abuse that validates James Reed's concerns about his son's character and judgment. She looked up from her notes, her gaze sweeping the courtroom. The second will is hereby validated as the true and final testament of James Reed. The first will is invalidated in its entirety. Ashley Reed is recognized as majority shareholder and controller of the estate as specified in the valid will. Furthermore, pursuant to the no contest clause and the evidence of coercion presented, Richard Reed forfeits any and all indirect claims to the estate. This ruling is final and enforceable immediately. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down with a sound like a gunshot. I had won. Completely, totally, undeniably won. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, microphones were thrust in my face. Someone shouted, "Ms. Reed, what do you plan to do with your inheritance?" I looked at the reporter who'd asked the question, a young woman with a microphone and an expectant expression, and gave the only answer I had. "I'm going to save my grandfather's company. Then I'm going back to Seattle." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't vengeful. It was simply the truth. 2 days later, I sat in the same conference room where the will had been read 5 months ago, but this time I was the one calling the meeting. Emergency shareholder meeting, properly noticed, legally binding. The minority shareholders filed in looking nervous, 3 cousins who each owned small stakes relics of Grandpa's early profit-sharing agreements. Cousin Jake, who'd whispered, "Ouch, that's cold," at the will reading, wouldn't meet my eyes. Cousin Sarah sat rigid in her chair. Only Cousin Michael, the youngest, looked at me with something approaching curiosity rather than hostility. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. The court ruled in my favor. I now control 65% of Reed family holdings. That makes me majority shareholder. I looked at each of them in turn. I know many of you sided with my father during this process. That was your right. But the court has spoken. I'm now majority owner, and I'm here to make decisions that will determine whether this company survives or dies. Jake shifted uncomfortably. Your father built this company. My grandfather built this company. My father drove it $3.5 million into debt. I slid copies of Patricia's forensic report across the table. You're welcome to review the analysis, but here's what you need to know. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to save this company from bankruptcy. You can work with me or you can sell your shares. Your choice. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Michael spoke. What's your plan? Financial stabilization, professional management, accountability. And the first step is removing the person responsible for this mess from any position of authority. I called for a vote to remove Richard Reed from the board of directors. The vote was 87% in favor my shares, plus Marcus Thompson and Sarah Chen's votes. It was procedurally cold, legally bulletproof, and brutally efficient. Richard Reed was officially removed from all corporate governance. 3 days later, I chaired my first board meeting. I'd sent notice to all board members, including a pointed reminder that Richard was no longer a director and his attendance was neither required nor welcome. He showed up anyway. I was in what had been his office, my office now preparing notes when security called. Ms. Reed, your father is in the lobby demanding to attend the board meeting. Remind him he was removed from the board by shareholder vote and is no longer authorized to attend. If he refuses to leave, call the police. Through the security camera feed on my computer, I watched him argue with the security guard, watched his face turn red, watched him finally storm out after the guard reached for his phone. The board meeting itself was tense. 6 directors sitting around a table, half of them clearly resentful that I was in the chair. I didn't ease into it. Reed Family Holdings is $3.5 million underwater. If we don't act immediately, we'll be filing for bankruptcy within 18 months. My first priority is financial stabilization. I'm bringing in a corporate restructuring firm. We'll audit every expense line, cut unnecessary costs, including the excessive executive compensation my father awarded himself, and renegotiate our debt load. We'll refocus on our 3 profitable divisions and wind down the vanity projects that have been bleeding money. Sarah Chen, the outside director, spoke first. What guarantees do we have that you're qualified to manage this turnaround? With all due respect, you run a small consulting firm. This is a $15 million operation. None, I said flatly. You have no guarantees except these. I've successfully managed $8 million in client assets over 3 years with 0 losses and a 96% retention rate. I understand fiduciary duty because I practice it daily, and unlike my father, I don't treat company funds as my personal bank account. I met her gaze. You're welcome to vote me out, but before you do, ask yourself if you'd rather bet on someone who's never lost a client's money or continue with the status quo that's driven us to insolvency. She sat back, saying nothing. The next item on the agenda was termination of Richard Reed as CEO. The board voted 5-1 in favor, with only one of Dad's longtime friends dissenting. The grounds: breach of fiduciary duty, gross mismanagement, and use of company resources for personal legal battles. For cause, termination meant 0 severance, no golden parachute, no consulting agreement. By the end of that day, his company-provided Mercedes was repossessed from his driveway. His corporate credit cards were canceled mid-transaction at a restaurant. His office keys were surrendered to security. I watched the building's security footage later, my father being escorted from the lobby with a cardboard box of personal items, the same walk of shame countless executives before him had made. I felt no triumph watching it, just exhaustion and a strange, hollow relief. This man had controlled my family's narrative for 35 years. He'd defined my worth, my sister's value, my mother's existence. In one morning of corporate procedure, his power evaporated. I moved into his office that afternoon. It was larger than I needed, decorated with the kind of masculine furniture that screamed, "Important man works here." On the wall behind the desk hung a photograph, my father and Grandpa James at some company event, both in suits, both smiling. It must have been taken 15 years ago when my father first took over. I should have taken it down. It represented everything I was trying to move past. But I left it hanging. "That's who you could have been, Dad," I said to the empty office. I was packing up to leave for the day, exhausted from 10 hours of restructuring meetings, when someone knocked. A process server stood in the doorway with papers. "Ashley Reed." "Yes. You've been served." I took the papers and he left. I stood there reading the complaint, my exhaustion turning to something darker. Richard Reed versus Ashley Reed. Civil complaint. $5 million in damages for defamation, tortious interference, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. My father was suing me. Again. I called Catherine from my car, my hands shaking with anger as I drove back to my hotel. "He's suing me. $5 million for defamation and emotional distress." Catherine was silent for a moment, then she laughed. Actually laughed. "Forward me the complaint. I want to see this." I sent it from my phone at a red light. 2 minutes later, Catherine called back. "This is the most legally frivolous thing I've seen in 15 years of practice. Truth is an absolute defense to defamation. Everything you told that reporter was factually accurate. And emotional distress, that requires outrageous conduct. If anyone's conduct was outrageous, it's his." She sounded almost gleeful. "Ashley, he's doing this to harass you, to deplete your resources with more legal fees, to make you so exhausted you'll give up. But he just made a catastrophic mistake." How is getting sued again a good thing? Because now we can countersue immediately for malicious prosecution. And we can file a separate civil suit for the $340,000 he stole from you. He opened a door he can't close. We've been considering whether to pursue civil remedies beyond the probate case he just forced our hand and gave us the perfect venue. Within a week, Catherine had filed 2 separate legal actions. The first was a counterclaim to Richard's lawsuit, arguing that his suit was frivolous and filed in bad faith seeking attorney fees and sanctions. The second was a standalone civil complaint, Ashley Reed versus Richard Reed. The claims were specific and devastating conversion of trust assets, breach of fiduciary duty as a company officer, and financial elder abuse. We were seeking $500,000 in compensatory damages. The college fund theft plus 20 years of interest and lost investment growth and $2 million in punitive damages. Why punitive? I asked when Catherine showed me the filing. Because we need to send a message, and because Idaho law allows punitive damages when the defendant's conduct is especially egregious, oppressive, or fraudulent. Your father's behavior checks all 3 boxes. She leaned back in her chair. Here's my strategy. Let's combine everything into one trial. His suit, our counterclaim, our separate complaint, the judge can consolidate them. Get everything over with in one proceeding. The probate ruling is res judicata, which means the facts are already established by the court. We don't have to reprove that he stole from you or coerced your grandfather. This trial is just about calculating damages and consequences. And he'll be there, in court, having to answer for everything. Yes, and Ashley, this trial will be public. Every detail will be in the court record. Everyone who believed his lies will hear the truth extensively, specifically with documentation. The pretrial motions began immediately. Richard's attorney tried every procedural maneuver to get the cases dismissed or at least separated. Catherine blocked each attempt. The judge consolidated the cases and set an aggressive timeline. That's when the local media got involved. The Cascade Chronicle obtained the public court filings. Anyone could access them. They were part of the public record and ran a front-page story. The headline read, "Richard Reed accused of stealing daughter's college fund, embezzling company assets." The article was thorough and damning. It included specific allegations from the complaint, the $120,000 theft, the excessive company draws, the documented coercion of James Reed. Most devastating were the quotes from the audio recordings, now part of the public court record. She'll accept scraps because she's been accepting them her whole life. The reporter had done their homework. They'd obtained Patricia's forensic analysis, Marcus Thompson's testimony from the probate hearing, even quotes from Judge Thornton's ruling. It was all public information, but seeing it laid out in black and white in the local paper that everyone in Cascade read over morning coffee changed everything. I went to the grocery store 3 days after the article ran, bracing myself for the usual cold shoulders and averted eyes. Instead, a woman I'd known from church approached me in the produce section. "Ashley, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. Your father told us you'd abandoned the family, that you were doing this out of greed. I believed him. I'm ashamed that I believed him." It happened again at the pharmacy, at the coffee shop I'd stopped going to, at the gas station. People who'd shunned me for months now apologized, their faces red with embarrassment. Mrs. Patterson found me in the church parking lot on Sunday and pulled me into a fierce hug. "I always knew, sweetheart. I always knew who you were and who he was. I'm just glad everyone else finally sees it too." Even the pastor, who'd delivered several sermons with pointed references to family loyalty and forgiveness, issued a public apology during the service. "I was misled about a situation involving members of our congregation. I spoke without full knowledge of the truth, and I'm sorry for the harm my words may have caused." The social rehabilitation was dizzying. 5 months of isolation reversed in a single week. But I felt no satisfaction in it. These people had been so quick to believe the worst about me, so eager to accept my father's narrative without question. Their apologies felt hollow. Meanwhile, Richard's attorney was scrambling. He filed a motion to dismiss on procedural grounds, denied. He requested a change of venue, arguing that media coverage had poisoned the jury pool, denied, with the judge noting that Richard himself had courted media attention. He proposed settlement conferences. Catherine brought me each settlement offer. $10,000. Then $50,000. then $150,000 with a mutual non-disclosure agreement. "What do you want to do?" Catherine asked after the third offer. "No, he wanted his day in court. He sued me to harass me, to bankrupt me, to make me give up. Now he's getting exactly what he asked for, a public trial where every single thing he's done will be documented for the record. Even if it means more legal fees, more time." "Even then," Catherine smiled. "Good, because he deserves to face full consequences for once in his miserable life." The trial was set for 30 days out. Catherine warned me that the prosecution timeline was aggressive, but she was ready. We both were. 2 weeks before trial, Richard's attorney filed an emergency motion requesting a continuance. The motion included a doctor's note stating that Richard was experiencing severe anxiety and health complications from the stress of litigation. The judge denied it. That same afternoon, I got a call from Harris. "Ashley, you should know the district attorney's office contacted me. They're reviewing the evidence from the probate case to determine whether to file criminal charges for financial elder abuse and coercion. If they move forward, Richard could be facing prison time." The trial began on a Tuesday morning in late July, 7 months after Grandpa's death. This time, the courtroom allowed cameras. It was considered a matter of public interest, given the probate case and the community impact. Local news stations set up outside the courthouse. Inside, every seat was filled by 9 a.m. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Catherine, watching people file in. Neighbors I'd known my whole life, former teachers, church members, business owners. Some looked sympathetic now, others just curious. This had become Cascade's biggest story in decades. The Reed family's dirty laundry aired in public, every detail documented and broadcast. My father sat at the defense table with his attorney Morrison, who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. Richard's face was drawn, his expensive suit hanging looser than it had at the probate hearing. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked like fear. The judge, a different magistrate this time, Judge William Park, called the court to order. Catherine stood to deliver her opening statement. "Your Honor, members of the jury, this case is simple. A father systematically stole from his daughter for 30 years, lied about it, and when caught, tried to destroy her reputation rather than accept responsibility. Over the next 3 days, we will prove every dollar stolen, every lie told, every manipulation attempted. The evidence is not ambiguous. The recordings are clear. The financial documents don't lie. Richard Reed is a thief who stole from his own child, and it's time he paid for it." Morrison's opening was weaker, defensive. He tried to paint my father as a devoted family man whose business decisions were misunderstood, whose tough love was mischaracterized as abuse. But even he seemed to know how hollow it sounded. The first day was technical, Patricia's forensic testimony walking the jury through bank records, trust documents, transfer logs. Every dollar accounted for, every theft documented. The jury took notes, their faces growing increasingly troubled as the scope of the financial abuse became clear. The second day brought Marcus Thompson, who testified about my father's mismanagement of Reed family holdings, about the excessive draws, the personal expenses charged to the company, the warnings ignored. But it was the third day that changed everything. Catherine called Olivia to the stand. My sister walked to the witness box in a simple blue dress, no jewelry, her hair pulled back. She looked younger than 31 and terrified. As she was sworn in, I saw her hands shaking. My father stared at her from the defense table, his face hard. It was the same look he'd used our entire childhood to keep us in line, that expression that said, "You know what happens if you disobey me." I watched Olivia see. It watched her falter for just a moment. Then she lifted her chin and looked at Catherine instead. "Ms. Reed, how would you describe your relationship with your father?" Olivia's voice started quiet, but grew stronger as she spoke. "I was his favorite. Everyone knew it. But I've learned that being his favorite didn't mean he loved me more. It meant he could control me more easily." Catherine walked her through her testimony methodically. Olivia described the intercept mail, seeing my letters to Grandpa in the trash, my father claiming they were just Ashley being dramatic. She recounted the phone calls my father screened, telling Grandpa I was too busy when I'd actually called that morning. When you were 19, you asked your father to help Ashley with college expenses. What happened? Olivia's eyes filled with tears. He screamed at me. I mean, really screamed. He said Ashley would ruin everything if she ever had real resources, that she was dangerous because she didn't need us. He said if I ever brought it up again, he'd cut me off completely. I was so scared I didn't speak for 2 days. Did you understand what he meant by dangerous? I do now. He was afraid of her because she was the only one he couldn't control. Morrison tried to discredit her on cross-examination, suggesting she'd been coached or manipulated by me. But Olivia's sincerity was evident. When he pushed too hard, asking if she was testifying against her father for money, Olivia looked him dead in the eye. I'm testifying because it's the truth, and I'm tired of living in a family built on lies. The courtroom was silent when she stepped down. We rested our case that afternoon. Morrison presented a brief defense character witnesses who testified that Richard was a respected businessman and devoted father. But after 3 days of documented evidence, their testimonies felt like empty platitudes. Closing arguments took an hour. Then the jury deliberated. They were out for 90 minutes. When they filed back in, I couldn't read their faces. The foreperson, a woman in her 60s, handed the verdict form to the bailiff. Judge Park read aloud, "In the matter of conversion of trust assets, we find for the plaintiff damages $120,000. In the matter of breach of fiduciary duty, we find for the plaintiff damages $220,000. In the matter of financial elder abuse, we find for the plaintiff statutory damages as provided by Idaho Code. The compensatory total $340,000. Furthermore, the jury awards punitive damages in the amount of $850,000. I heard gasps throughout the courtroom. Punitive damages at 2.5 times compensatory was the maximum allowed under Idaho law for this type of conduct. Additionally, Judge Park continued, the defendant is ordered to pay the plaintiff's attorney fees in the amount of $127,000. Total judgment, $1,317,000. My father's head dropped into his hands. His shoulders shook, though I couldn't tell if from tears or rage. Judge Park wasn't finished. Mr. Reed, your conduct as documented in this trial represents a profound betrayal of trust. I am forwarding all evidence from this proceeding to the Ada County prosecuting attorney for review of potential criminal charges under Idaho Code, Section 18 to 1505, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. The gavel came down. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. A young man with a microphone pushed forward. Ms. Reed, you just won over $1 million in damages. How do you feel? I thought about how to answer that. Triumphant, vindicated. But those weren't the right words. Believed, I said finally. I finally feel believed. That night, I was packing files in my hotel room when someone knocked. I opened the door to find my father standing there looking more broken than I'd ever seen him. His eyes were red-rimmed, his suit wrinkled. Please, he said, his voice cracking. I'm your father. Have some compassion. I looked at my father standing in the hotel hallway, this man who'd spent 35 years making me feel worthless, and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity, just a vast empty space where his power over me used to be. Can I come in just for a few minutes? Every instinct screamed to say no, to close the door, to end this. But I stepped back and let him enter. Not because I owed him anything, but because I needed to hear what he'd say. I needed to know if he was capable of genuine accountability or if this was just another manipulation. He stood in the middle of my hotel room looking around at the modest space like he couldn't believe his daughter lived this way. Then he turned to face me and I saw tears on his cheeks. Real tears, not the performative kind he'd used in court. I don't have $1.3 million, he said, his voice breaking. If you enforce this judgment, I'll lose everything. The house, my retirement, everything I've built. Your mother will be homeless." I almost laughed at that. Mom isn't going back to you. She has her own money now. Money Grandpa made sure she'd have. He flinched. "Fine, but I'll lose everything. I made mistakes, Ashley. I know that now. But I'm still your father. You succeeded. You built a good business. You don't need this money. Please, show mercy. Forgive me like family should." He was crying harder now, and for a moment, just a moment, I felt that old pull. The little girl who'd tried so desperately to earn his love. The teenager who'd convinced herself that if she just achieved enough, he'd finally see her value. The young woman who'd left home thinking distance would heal the wound. That girl wanted to say yes, wanted to believe that mercy would transform him into the father she'd always needed. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I thought about the lemonade stand kicked over in front of the neighbors, about applying to MIT and being told I was trying to compensate for natural limitations, about the college fund that should have been mine stolen to bail out his failures, about 30 years of being told I was nothing while he elevated Olivia as his perfect, controllable daughter. About the letters he intercepted, the calls. He screened the lies he told to keep me isolated from the one person who loved me. "You told me at Grandpa's will reading that $10 was enough to start a business." I said, my voice steady. "You were trying to humiliate me in front of everyone. But you were right about one thing: I didn't need your money. I never did. But you needed mine and you stole it. I was trying to save the business. You were trying to save yourself. And when that didn't work, you spent 30 years blaming me for not being the daughter you wanted. You didn't make mistakes, Dad. You made choices. Deliberate, calculated choices to steal from me, lie about me, and destroy any chance I had of a relationship with my grandfather." He looked at me with something that might have been recognition. "So you're just going to destroy me?" "No. The court decided your punishment, not me. I'm not going to add to it or reduce it. I'm just going to let justice happen." I walked to the door and opened it. "That's not revenge. That's accountability. You taught me that people of real worth prove themselves through their actions. Well, here we are." He stood there for a long moment, and I watched him cycle through emotions: disbelief, anger, desperation. Finally, he straightened his shoulders, and some of that old arrogance returned. "You've become cold, heartless, just like I always said." "No, Dad. I've become free." I held the door open. He walked toward it, then turned back one more time. "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I just closed the door and heard his footsteps fade down the hallway. Over the next 60 days, the judgment was enforced with mechanical efficiency. Catherine hired a collection attorney who specialized in asset recovery. I didn't involve myself in the details. I authorized the action and let the legal system work. The mansion on Pinecrest Drive was foreclosed and sold at auction. After the mortgage was paid off, the proceeds totaled $890,000. His investment accounts, which he'd hidden from the company's bankruptcy proceedings, were seized and liquidated $127,000. His 401k retirement account was garnished for the maximum percentage allowed by Idaho law, 18% over 5 years, with the first year's payment totaling $180,000. The Mercedes SUV he'd been leasing was repossessed. His remaining equity sold $48,000. Total recovered $1,245,000, about 95% of the judgment. I received updates from the collection attorney via email, clinical reports that detailed the dismantling of my father's life. I felt no joy reading them, no triumph, just a sense that something that should have happened decades ago was finally occurring. Through Olivia, who maintained minimal contact with him, I learned the rest. He'd moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in the part of Cascade where the factory workers lived, a neighborhood he'd once described as where ambition goes to die. He'd taken a job at H&R Block, doing basic tax preparation, hourly work, no benefits, preparing returns for people who made in a year what he used to spend on a car lease. The Cascade Country Club revoked his membership when he couldn't pay his dues. Former business associates stopped returning his calls. Church friends who'd stood with him during the trial now crossed the street to avoid conversation. The local newspaper ran a follow-up story 6 weeks after the trial. Former businessman faces consequences for financial abuse. It detailed the asset seizures, the apartment, the job at H&R Block. It was factual, not cruel, but the fall from grace was stark. My father wasn't in prison. He hadn't been charged criminally. The DA apparently decided the civil judgment was sufficient punishment. But his reputation, his lifestyle, his power, all of it was gone. And I had done that. Not through revenge or cruelty, but simply by refusing to protect him from the consequences of his own choices. I returned to Seattle in September, 8 months after Grandpa's death. My apartment felt foreign after so long away, but also like sanctuary. I spent a week doing nothing but sleeping and watching the rain, letting the weight of the past months finally settle. Then I went back to work, rebuilding my business, reconnecting with clients, remembering who I was before this all began. A month after my return, I came home to find an envelope slipped under my door. Forwarded from Harris's office. My name written in Grandpa's careful handwriting. One more letter. One final message from beyond the grave. I stood in my apartment holding the envelope, afraid to open it. 9 months since Grandpa died. 8 months since the will reading. I'd won everything: the probate case, the civil trial, control of the company. But I hadn't felt like I'd won. I'd felt exhausted, hollowed out, like I'd survived a war but couldn't remember what I'd been fighting for. I opened the envelope carefully, as if the paper might disintegrate in my hands. Inside was a letter folded around something else. I unfolded the paper, and 2 items fell onto my kitchen counter: a photograph and what looked like currency in plastic preservation. The photograph made my breath catch. It showed me at maybe 8 years old, sitting on the curb in front of the Reed house. My face was blotchy from crying, my hair disheveled. Behind me, you could see overturned furniture, the card table, the pitcher, the hand-painted sign reading Ashley's Lemonade. The concrete was dark with spilled lemonade, and my small hands were clenched in my lap. I had no memory of this photo being taken. I remembered the day vividly, every humiliating second of it, but not Grandpa with a camera. The second item was a $10 bill sealed in archival plastic. On the plastic, in Grandpa's handwriting, "First investment, never forget what you built from this." My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't unfold the letter. His handwriting covered both sides of the page, the words slightly wavering, like he'd written it slowly, carefully. "My dearest Ashley, if you're reading this, it means you won. Not just the legal battles, though I knew you would, but the deeper war. You stood up to your father. You refused to accept his definition of your worth. You did something I could never do. I need to confess something that's haunted me for 27 years. I took this photograph the day your father destroyed your lemonade stand. I was there, Ashley. I saw the whole thing. I'd driven over to buy lemonade from you because Linda had called me so proud of your little business venture. I arrived just as Richard came out of the house. I saw him yell at you. I saw the rage on his face, completely disproportionate to a child's lemonade stand. I saw him kick over your table, smash your pitcher, tell you that you were embarrassing the family. I saw you crying, apologizing for something you shouldn't have had to apologize for, and I did nothing to stop him. I stood there by my truck, frozen. I told myself I'd talk to him later, that it wasn't my place to intervene in how he parented, that maybe he was just having a bad day. But the truth, I've carried like a stone in my chest for almost 3 decades, is that I was a coward. I chose peace with my son over protecting my granddaughter. After Richard dragged you inside, I picked up your sign from the sidewalk. I took this photograph of you sitting on that curb, devastated. Then I slipped that $10 bill into your jacket pocket with a note because I couldn't find the words to say what I should have said out loud. You did nothing wrong. Your father is wrong. I'm sorry I didn't defend you. That photograph stayed on my desk for 27 years where only I could see it. not on display that would have required explaining it to Richard, but in my desk drawer where I looked at it every morning when I opened that drawer for a pen or paper. It became a reminder of my failure. Every time I saw your crying 8-year-old face, I asked myself, when will I be brave enough to defend her? When will I find the courage to tell Richard he's destroying his daughter? I never did. Not while I was alive. I chose the coward's path. I let you suffer his cruelty while I maintained a comfortable relationship with my son. I told myself I was keeping peace. Really, I was keeping myself comfortable at your expense. By the time I understood what I should have done, what I could have done, you were gone. Seattle, a new life, and I couldn't blame you. You'd escaped. You'd done what I'd never had the courage to do. You'd walked away from abuse. But I could still give you weapons. I could still try to make things right, even if I wouldn't be there to see it. I kept that $10 bill because it represents everything your father couldn't destroy: your ingenuity, your resilience, your ability to create value from nothing. You were 8 years old and you'd already figured out profit margins, customer service pricing strategy. You were a natural entrepreneur, and he crushed that spark because he was terrified of your independence. When I designed my will, I knew Richard would try to erase you even in death. I'd watched him do it your whole life. So I created a test. I instructed Morrison to draft a first will that was deliberately insulting $10 and a condescending note, knowing that if Richard was the man I feared he'd become, he'd embrace that will eagerly. He'd see it as validation of everything he'd always believed that you weren't worth investing in. The $10 wasn't my final word to you, Ashley. It was a trap for him and a symbol for you. If anyone ever uses $10 to humiliate you, I wanted you to be able to remind them and yourself what you built from it. From that first $10 investment when you were 8, you built yourself into a woman who manages millions, who helps families protect their futures, who turned a childhood trauma into a career serving others. You didn't need my money to prove your worth. You never did. But you needed my acknowledgement. You needed someone in this family to say, I see you. I'm proud of you. You matter. I'm sorry I couldn't give you that while I was alive. I'm sorry I chose comfort over courage. I'm sorry I let you grow up thinking you were less valuable than your sister, less worthy of love, less deserving of investment. Your worth was never in question, Ashley. Only my courage was. If you're reading this, it means you fought for yourself. It means you refused to accept the scraps Richard tried to force-feed you. It means you demanded the justice I was too weak to give you while I lived. I'm proud of you. I always was, even when I didn't show it, even when my silence made you think otherwise. Please forgive a coward who loved you, but showed it too late. Your grandfather, James Reed. P.S. The company, the money, the assets. Those aren't your real inheritance? Your real inheritance is knowing finally and completely that you were never the problem. He was, and you were brave enough to prove it. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness exactly, but something more complicated. Grief mixed with relief, anger mixed with forgiveness, loss mixed with a strange sense of being found. Grandpa had been there. He'd witnessed one of the most formative moments of my childhood, one of the first times my father had publicly humiliated me for daring to be ambitious. And he'd done nothing. For 27 years I'd carried the weight of that moment alone, thinking no one had seen it, no one had understood how much it hurt. But he'd seen. He'd known. And he'd been too afraid of his own son to intervene. That should have made me angrier. It should have felt like another betrayal. Instead, it felt like permission to be human, to acknowledge that even people who loved you could fail you. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That Grandpa had spent nearly 3 decades hating himself for his cowardice before finally finding the strength to act not in person, where it would have required confronting Richard face to face, but through the law, through the careful architecture of wills and trusts and recorded conversations. He'd given me what he couldn't give himself, the tools to fight back. I picked up the photograph and the $10 bill, looking at them together. That crying 8-year-old on the curb and this piece of currency that had somehow become a symbol of everything I'd built from nothing. I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I called a framing shop and asked for their best archival preservation work. I wanted the photograph and the $10 bill mounted together, professionally preserved, meant to last generations. When I picked it up a week later, I hung it in my office. Not hidden away like Grandpa had kept the photo, but displayed, visible. A reminder not of shame, but of survival, of a little girl whose father tried to break her spirit and who grew up to prove him wrong about everything. With Grandpa's final letter came clarity about what I needed to do with everything I'd inherited. Not just the money or the company, but the responsibility of transforming his legacy into something that honored his intentions rather than my father's corruption. Reed Family Holdings needed professional management, and I wasn't arrogant enough to think I could run a company while maintaining my Seattle practice. I hired a CEO named David Martinez, 56, who specialized in turning around family businesses. His first assessment was brutally honest. You've inherited a mess. $3.5 million in debt, demoralized staff board members who either hate you or are waiting to see if you fail. But the core business model is sound. Your grandfather built something good. Your father nearly destroyed it. We can save it, but it won't look like it did. Over the next year, David and I worked together to restructure everything. We negotiated with creditors, reducing the debt load to something manageable. We cut expenses ruthlessly, including the excessive executive compensation packages my father had awarded himself and his cronies. We sold off the vanity projects that had been bleeding money and refocused on the 3 core divisions that actually generated profit: commercial real estate management, small business consulting, and financial planning services for regional clients. The company that emerged was smaller, less flashy, but profitable and ethical. I implemented an employee profit-sharing plan, 10% of annual profits distributed among staff based on tenure and performance. I mandated transparent financial reporting with quarterly updates to all employees, not just shareholders. I wanted everyone to understand where the money came from and where it went. Reed Family Holdings would never make me wealthy. After paying down debt and funding operations, the company generated modest returns. But it sustained 43 jobs in Idaho, served local businesses that needed expertise, and honored what Grandpa had originally built. I kept the company name despite several board members suggesting a rebrand. It's Grandpa's legacy, not my father's. I told them during one particularly contentious meeting. I won't let one man's mistakes erase decades of good work by others. The Reed name meant something before my father corrupted it. It will mean something good again. While the company stabilized, my mother was going through her own transformation. Linda filed for divorce from Richard in October, 10 months after Grandpa's death. Idaho is a community property state, which meant she was entitled to half of remaining marital assets. Given that most of my father's assets had been seized to satisfy the judgment against him, there wasn't much to divide. But between her secret account from Grandpa, now at $180,000, and her portion of what remained, she walked away with approximately $230,000. At 64 years old, she bought a small condo in Boise, 40 minutes from Cascade, but far enough to feel like a new start. She adopted 2 cats from the local shelter and named them Independence and Freedom, which made me laugh until I realized she was completely serious. She started taking painting classes at the community college, something she'd mentioned wanting to do since I was a child, always dismissed by my father as a waste of money we don't have for hobbies. Her early attempts were objectively not good. But watching her face light up when she showed me her latest watercolor of the reservoir, I understood it wasn't about technical skill. It was about doing something purely for herself, with no one to criticize or control or judge. She also started volunteering at a domestic violence shelter, helping women navigate the practical aspects of leaving abusive relationships, finding housing, opening bank accounts, understanding financial independence. I spent 40 years in that trap, she told me over one of our weekly lunches. If my story can help even one woman leave sooner than I did, it's worth something. You left eventually, I said. That counts. She smiled, but it was bittersweet. I lost myself at 24. I'm 64 now. That's 40 years I can't get back, but maybe I can finally become someone I actually like. Watching my mother discover who she was beneath 40 years of suppression was like watching someone learn to breathe after nearly drowning. She was tentative at first, constantly seeking permission for decisions that were hers alone to make. But gradually, over months, I watched her shoulders straighten, her voice grow stronger, her smile reach her eyes. Mother and daughter had lunch every Wednesday when I was in Idaho, which was increasingly often as I split my time between Seattle and managing the company transition. We were rebuilding a relationship that had barely existed before, one where she was allowed to be a person, not just an extension of my father's will. Olivia's transformation took a different shape, but was no less profound. With her $500,000 annual distribution from the trust, she had the financial security to make choices based on what she wanted rather than what she needed to survive. Her first choice surprised me. She went back to school. I never finished my art history degree, she told me during a phone call 3 months after the trial. I dropped out junior year when Dad decided I should work at the gallery instead. He said a degree was a waste of time when he could get me a real job. I want to finish it. For me. She enrolled at Boise State and moved into an apartment near campus, not the condo my father owned, but a place she rented herself in her own name, furnished with her own choices. She sent me photos of her little studio apartment with its thrift store furniture and plants she was learning to keep alive. It's mine, she texted. First place that's ever been really mine. She finished her degree the following spring, walking across that stage at 32 years old with our mother and me in the audience, cheering loud enough to embarrass her. After graduation, she got a job at the Boise Art Museum, not through connections, not because someone owed my father a favor, but because she applied, interviewed well, and knew her subject matter. We texted regularly, now real conversations about books and movies and her cats and my business. We were building something that had never existed before, an actual sisterhood based on mutual respect rather than our father's divide-and-conquer dynamics. On the 1-year anniversary of the will reading, I received a card from her. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for fighting. You freed all of us, not just yourself. I know it cost you so much, and I'm sorry I didn't understand sooner. I love you, and I'm proud of who you are. I always should have been." I cried reading it, this acknowledgement from my sister that what I'd done mattered beyond just legal victories and financial settlements. A few months later, Olivia called asking for my consultation on a trust disbursement. She wanted to buy a house, nothing extravagant, just a small 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood, and needed my approval for the down payment, which exceeded $50,000. Harris and I reviewed her request together. The house was reasonably priced in a stable area with a mortgage she could easily afford on her museum salary, even without the trust distributions. It was exactly the kind of responsible, future-oriented decision Grandpa had hoped she'd make. I approved it immediately. You're using it for your future. That's exactly what Grandpa wanted. By the time I stood in front of a small commercial building in Boise on a cold morning in November, 13 months after Grandpa's death, I understood something I hadn't fully grasped before. Inheritance isn't just what you receive. It's what you do with it. The building was modest, formerly a law office, now converted into something new. Workers were installing the final piece, a sign above the entrance. My mother stood on my left, Olivia on my right, all three of us looking up as the sign was revealed. The James Reed Foundation. The James Reed Foundation opened its doors in January, 14 months after Grandpa's death. I'd allocated $2 million from my inheritance to establish it, money that had been designated for my direct use, but that felt more meaningful, transformed into something that would help others. The foundation had one simple mission: support students from financially abusive families, kids whose college funds had been stolen, who'd been told they weren't worth investing in, who'd paid their own way through school while watching siblings receive full support. Young people who'd been taught that their value was conditional, negotiable, less than. The application didn't ask for SAT scores or GPAs. It asked one essay question. Tell us about a time your family made you doubt your worth and how you proved them wrong. Our first year, we received 463 applications. I read every single one, many of them through tears. So many stories that mirrored mine. Fathers who stole education funds to cover gambling debts. Mothers who gave everything to the golden child while the scapegoat worked 3 jobs. Parents who weaponized money as control. Love as transaction, support as leverage. We awarded 50 scholarships at $10,000 each. Not enough to cover full tuition at most universities, but enough to make a difference. Enough to say someone sees you. Someone believes you. Your worth is not defined by the people who failed to recognize it. The foundation office occupied 3 rooms in that small Boise building. The waiting area displayed the framed photograph of 8-year-old me crying on the curb next to the $10 bill Grandpa had slipped into my jacket. Below them, a plaque read, "What you build matters more than what you're given." Every scholarship recipient received a letter from me personally, and with it a photocopy of that $10 bill and a note. Someone once told me $10 was enough to start a business. They meant it as an insult. I took it as a challenge. Whatever your family told you that you weren't smart enough, worthy enough, valuable enough, they were wrong. Go prove it. By the time I returned to Seattle permanently in February, I'd spent 13 months in Idaho managing the company transition, establishing the foundation, and rebuilding relationships with my mother and sister. My apartment felt both familiar and foreign, like trying on clothes from a previous life that no longer quite fit. But my business still fit. Reed Financial Consulting had survived my absence thanks to my office manager's competence and my associates' dedication. Within 3 months, I'd hired 2 additional consultants and expanded our services to include family wealth mediation, helping families navigate inheritance issues before they became legal battles. I had expertise in that area now, earned the hardest way possible. I wasn't wealthy from the inheritance. After paying down Reed Family Holdings' debt covering legal fees and funding the foundation, my personal gain was modest. But I was successful on my own terms, which had always been the point. My mother visited Seattle quarterly, now staying in my spare bedroom that had sat empty for years. We'd shop at Pike Place Market, visit art galleries, have long dinners where we talked about everything and nothing. She'd become someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with, not just my mother, but a woman with her own thoughts, interests, struggles. She showed me her latest paintings, told me about the women she was helping at the shelter, complained about her cats being impossible divas. We were building something neither of us had known. We needed a real relationship, not one mediated through my father's expectations and judgments. Olivia called every Wednesday evening, our standing phone date. She'd tell me about her work at the museum, the classes she was taking, the house she'd bought, and was slowly making her own. Sometimes we talked about our father, where he was now, what he was doing, but mostly we didn't. He'd become background noise in our lives rather than the central narrative. I'd heard through Cascade gossip that he'd moved to Montana, somewhere small where no one knew the Reed family story. I didn't follow up, didn't Google him or check social media or ask for details. He'd spent 35 years controlling my story. I wasn't giving him space in my head anymore. Some of my Seattle friends, people who'd known nothing about my year-long absence beyond family emergency, would ask, "Where did you disappear to? You were just gone." I'd smile and say, "Family business, it's resolved now." They'd nod, sensing the finality in my tone, and we'd move on to other topics. That part of my life was over. I'd survived it. I'd transformed it. And now I was focused on what came next. In March, 15 months after Grandpa's death, I received a foundation application that made me stop breathing. The applicant was a 19-year-old named Emma Rodriguez from Boise. Her essay began, "My father told me I wasn't worth the money for college. He said I should be grateful he'd provided a roof over my head for 18 years, and that expecting more was entitled. He'd established a college fund when I was born. My grandparents contributed, family friends gave money for birthdays instead of presents. By the time I graduated high school, there should have been nearly $80,000. there was nothing. He'd spent it on his business, then blamed me for expecting help when he'd clearly raised me to be independent. She went on to describe working 3 jobs to pay her way through community college while watching her younger brother receive full financial support. She was studying accounting, maintaining a 3.8 GPA despite working 40 hours a week. She wanted to transfer to Boise State University but couldn't afford it without significant help. Her essay ended, "People ask if I'm angry at my father. I'm not angry, I'm determined. He doesn't get to define my worth. I define it. And I'm going to prove that I was always worth investing in, even if he couldn't see it." I approved her scholarship immediately and wrote her a personal letter. "Dear Emma, your father was wrong. About your worth, about what you deserved, about who gets to determine your value. Your worth was never his to decide, it was always yours to prove. And you already have by working 3 jobs, maintaining excellent grades, and refusing to let his failure become your limitation. Enclosed is your scholarship award, and something else, a copy of a $10 bill that someone important to me once gave me with a similar message. He believed I could build something from nothing. I did. You will too. Congratulations, and welcome to the James Reed Foundation family. Ashley Reed." 3 weeks later, I received her response. A handwritten note on simple stationery. "Dear Ms. Reed, I don't have words for what your scholarship means to me. Not just the money, though, that changes everything, but the message. Someone sees me. Someone believes me. For the first time in my life, I feel like maybe I wasn't wrong. Maybe he was. I'm going to make you proud. I'm going to build something amazing. And someday when I can, I'm going to help someone else the way you helped me. Thank you for giving me more than money. Thank you for giving me permission to believe in myself. With gratitude, Emma Rodriguez." I framed her letter and placed it on my desk next to Grandpa's photograph and the original $10 bill. 3 pieces of evidence that worth isn't given, it's recognized, defended, and ultimately proven. On a Thursday afternoon in early April, I stood at my office window looking out over the Seattle skyline. Rain streaked the glass, the city gray and alive beneath spring clouds. My phone sat on my desk, applications from the foundation stacked beside it. Another Emma somewhere needed to hear that she was worth more than she'd been told. Another young person was working multiple jobs, doubting themselves, carrying the weight of family betrayal while trying to build a future. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the next application. "Hello, this is Ashley Reed from the James Reed Foundation. I'm calling because we've reviewed your scholarship application and I wanted to tell you personally." I paused, looking at Grandpa's photograph, at that crying 8-year-old on the curb, at the $10 bill that had been meant as an insult and became a symbol. I smiled. They gave me $10 to start a business. Instead, I built a life and helped others build theirs too. And that's how Ashley Reed's story ends, not with bitterness, but with purpose. She didn't just win a legal battle. She transformed her pain into something that would help countless others break free from the same cycles of abuse and control. Here's what Ashley's journey teaches us. Your worth is not determined by the people who failed to see it. Not by your parents, not by your family, not by anyone who tried to make you feel small so they could feel powerful. Ashley spent 35 years believing her father's narrative about who she was. The moment she stopped accepting his definition and started living her own truth, everything changed. But this story is about more than revenge or justice. It's about breaking generational cycles. Ashley's grandfather failed her when she was 8 years old, choosing comfort over courage. But he spent his final years trying to make it right, giving her the tools to fight back. Ashley's mother spent 40 years trapped before finding freedom at 64. Olivia lived 31 years as a golden cage before discovering independence. Each generation had a chance to choose differently, and eventually they did. The most powerful lesson: you don't need permission to value yourself. You don't need validation from people who've spent years diminishing you. Ashley didn't wait for her father to apologize or acknowledge her worth. She claimed it herself, demanded it legally, and then used her victory to help others do the same. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, or doubted your worth because of how others treated you, I want you to know you're not alone. Your story matters. And like Ashley, you have the power to rewrite the ending. Please subscribe to this channel if Ashley's journey inspired you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for recognition in your own family? What would you have done in Ashley's position? And if you know someone who needs to hear this story, someone who's still accepting scraps when they deserve the whole table, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need permission to believe we're worth fighting for. Remember, they gave Ashley $10. She built a legacy. What will you build?